evening, everybody. It's November 26th, 2023. I'm your host, Nate Pike. This is The Breakdown. We took last week off, but boy, we're back. We got us a show tonight. Twists and turns, gonna have some fun. We got us an open mic that we're gonna do after we do our weekly roundup. We've already got a couple people who have said they're gonna be showing up for that. So, excuse me. Got a lot to talk about. We're gonna get right into it tonight with a story that we've been kind of following and talking about for a while now. We're talking about the Red Deer Catholic School Board trustee, Monique LaGrange. We have 2 weeks worth of material to catch up on here. So some of this is maybe a little bit fresh. Some of this is maybe a little bit less fresh. Some of it's a combination of both. This one is definitely more in the combination of both stream of things. So let's walk through it. For anybody who isn't familiar with the story, Monique LaGrange, a while back, posted a meme that she claimed she was told to post by the Holy Spirit. That's not the wildest part of the story. And that meme was a picture that had, was a meme. It had two pictures, and it kind of juxtaposed the two against each other as if they were comparable, which they're not. To be absolutely clear, on the top of the meme, it was a bunch of kids leaning out of a window, waving swastikas and wearing Nazi armbands. The bottom of the meme was kids waving pride flags, which are two totally different things, to be really, really clear. But she got herself into some hot water with that. She had herself a hearing. She was given some requirements for things that she had to do. It was a whole big thing. But the news broke on November 14th that she was removed. She lost her role as a school board trustee with the Red Deer Catholic School Board. And it was because, initially, the reports were, it was because of an appearance that she made on a talk show, a live stream podcast, if you will. All the rage these days, I'm told. But it was the comments that were made on this particular talk show that caused part of the problem. So a little bit of background on the talk show. It's called Truth Talk, not to be confused with Real Talk. Those are two different shows. They're very, very different. And we put together a bit of a mashup of clips from her appearance. Now it's a little bit on the lengthy side. It's a longer video clip than we normally play. It runs at about 4 minutes. But in order to really get just how egregious just the talk show appearance was, it's worth playing the 4 minutes worth. So we're going to play you the full 4 minutes, but it's important, really important to highlight here. There's a couple of things that you're going to see that happen in this mashup of clips, if you will. One of the things that Monique LaGrange was told was that she was absolutely not to present herself as a school board trustee or as representing the Red Deer Catholic School Board. You'll see by the captions that went to the wayside pretty quick. She also wasn't supposed to be speaking publicly about any of these issues. She had a bunch of other things that she had to do in order to earn herself out of the timeout box that she was placed in. And as you'll see as we go through this clip, and there's so much to unpack, she didn't really follow through on any of those.
Here they want you to take some indoctrinational training. Oh, sorry, that's not what the word they use. Sensitivity training and an apology letter. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Are you going to do that? Do you know anything about what sensitivity training even is?
Yeah, it's interesting. Sensitivity training, the wording and just the whole scenario of that. But they want me to take sensitivity training about the Holocaust, about the LGBTQ, and about social media, cultural sensitivity, and human rights. So I find it very interesting, the list that they have put out there, and how they decided on that list. I have no idea. Where they came up with this, I have no idea. But it is up to me to find it. Then it has to go in front of them to see if if they are willing to support it, and then it's up to me to pay for it as well, if that's what I choose to do. Which, if you know me, you'll know the answer to that.
Now, they also want you to like write an apology letter, right? What are you supposed to apologize for? I don't
Yeah, I don't
understand.
know. I don't know what I'm supposed to apologize for, because if I'm apologizing, that means I've been wrong about something. And so like I still have no idea on what they want me to apologize about. So, I'll continue to advocate for kids.
If you want, Al and I can draft up a letter for you. We can write, I apologize that you don't understand anything about me or how I see things. I apologize that you're blind. But you know what? We can write it for you if you want. Just sign your name. We'll
Sounds
write it for
great.
you. Has this changed this situation that you're in? Has it changed your views? Like, if you could rewind time, would you send that? Would you post that meme again? Would it change anything?
I would still post it again. It's not offensive if you understand, what is actually going on in the world. So it's not offensive. It's thought provoking. It's a warning of what could be. History likes to repeat itself. And so where are we in that circle of history? So, people need to wake up. They seriously do. And parents need to know what's going on. So
Agreed.
I think it's super important. But most of us that have gone to university in the last 20 years, we have been victims of this indoctrination ourselves. And so when you're indoctrinated, you don't think anything of what you're, the way you're teaching it, the words you're using. And so it just becomes your normal. And so this filters down. It's a very slow drip into our classrooms. And so it's just being aware of how the process works and the whole agenda of how they are indoctrinating us, where that's coming from. You have to understand that as well. So be aware. As a parent, take your authority back. So you are the primary educator, and we can't forget that. We as parents, and so I have a unique perspective here because I'm a parent. I have a background. I was a teacher, and I'm now a school trustee. So I've seen the whole gamut, basically. And so I have a very interesting perspective. And so authority is huge. So parents have given their authority away to something that maybe they perhaps didn't recognize. And so it's getting that authority back and educating your kids. You should be educating your kids, about relationships and sexuality. That's your job as a parent. That's between you, your child, and God, not the teachers. And so the teachers are there to do reading, arithmetic, that sort of thing, right? And, we need to just make sure that we are, as a parent, we know what the boundaries are.
Knowing what boundaries are would have been helpful probably before appearing on that particular show. Now, obviously, there's a lot to unpack here for the audio listeners. You probably didn't get to see all of the nodding that she was doing, but one of those commentators, his name's Corey, by the way. When Corey was making his comments about indoctrination, and how she had to attend sensitivity training, which he referred to as an indoctrination training, when he made his comments about the apology and how he didn't think it was right, and how he and Alan, we'll get to that in a sec, he and Alan would write the apology for her. Monique LaGrange was just nodding away. So she was doing that tacit agreement thing that people do when somebody's saying something that they're totally comfortable with or they agree with. But it's fascinating that she said at the beginning of that clip that she had no idea why she would have to attend any sort of sensitivity training to do with LGBTQ2S+ issues or the Holocaust. But then later on in the clip makes it very, very clear, history repeats itself. And she tries to make some correlations again in the same way that meme did. The one thing you have to give her props for is at no point in that the whole episode is about 30 minutes long, and at no point did she make any plugs for the Obsessed with Jesus t-shirt line. So I don't know. if that was responsible or opportunity missed. I guess that remains to be seen. But it's worth talking about as well, for greater context, what Truth Talk is all about. Because we've got the one host, Corey, and then we've got the other host, Alan. Corey did a very good job of referring to Alan as Alan, which is a little bit, I don't know, strange, given that Alan is actually Corey's dad. I don't know what to do with that. I would personally be very uncomfortable calling my father by his first name in a colloquial way. But hey, different dynamics, different folks, nothing to judge there. But it's really worth noting, Alan, and the last name on that program was Alan Huntsberger. Now, why is that name so familiar? Oh, that's right, because it's that Alan. We are talking about Alan Huntsberger, the Wild Rose candidate, who back in the day got himself in all kinds of trouble because he had some thoughts that he wanted to put in a blog post because Lady Gaga released a CD. He put up a whole blog post. This is the original, the OG Lake of Fire. I've decided to do a sequel to Lady Gaga's CD, Born This Way. My CD will be entitled Born This Way, and that's why Jesus came. The world is believing the lie that you were born this way. You now have a right to live this way, the way you were born. Sounds great at first, except nobody is mentioning what the results will be of living the way you were born. If you were born this way, are you going to die this way? Well, if that is true, and it is, then you have fallen right into the trap that is as old as time, the trap that Satan wants for you. But what is it you want? You see, you can live the way you were born, and if you die the way you were born, you will suffer the rest of eternity in the lake of fire, hell, a place of eternal suffering. It goes on to attack public education and a whole bunch of other things. It's back for 2012. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time getting into that because mostly it's just gross rhetoric. But the news came that Monique LaGrange she'd been turfed, she'd been punted. And right around the same time, Danielle Smith was doing a bit of a press conference. And she was asked about it.
Ago, it was mid last week, Red Deer Catholic Regional Schools trustee Monique LaGrange was removed from her position after violations related to sharing a meme comparing Pride Month to Nazi indoctrination. What do you think about that?
Well, I've said that the only time you should ever make reference to the Nazi flag is when you're talking about actual Nazis. It's an inappropriate comparison to use. It undermines the horrible experience that Jews had during the Holocaust, and it's inappropriate. So she has to take responsibility for her actions, and the board made a decision, and that is an independent process that we allow under the School Act.
So it was so bad, even Danielle Smith came out and said, yeah, that's pretty bad. And it's worth remembering that this is the same Danielle Smith who made all kinds of Nazi comparisons during the COVID years. So I mean, on the silver side, I guess maybe even Danielle Smith has learned something about don't say Nazi unless it's a Nazi. But turns out it wasn't just that talk show appearance on November 24th, there were some more details that came out. And I just got to say for a quick sec, the reporter who's been doing all of the coverage of this saga has primarily been a guy named Josh Hall by Red Deer News Now. He's absolutely been doing an unbelievable job. And this is, again, one of the reasons why it's so important that we celebrate and support real journalists, which we're not, because this is how actual change happens. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. But, and again, this was released at the behest of LaGrange's lawyer, ostensibly. So there were some more details. The full report was actually released, and it was released through the Red Deer News Now story, where it detailed some other things that Monique LaGrange had done. On September 20th, 2023, she posted 2 items to her personal Facebook page. So again, this is well after she got into trouble. The first depicted a wolf wearing facial makeup and licking its lips with the captions, "I just want to read some books to your chickens." And the second was a photograph of a non-binary author with the caption, "Parental rights really anger me." non-binary children's book author pushes back against parents. So it's not, I mean, the appearance on Truth Talk is probably more than enough to demonstrate that she wasn't going to be following along with the expectations of the board. She wasn't going to be doing the work that the board had asked her to do to make sure that she didn't, I don't know, post memes about wolves wearing facial makeup saying that they wanted to read to chickens. She made it very clear she wasn't going to do any of that. But then she went ahead and she posted the memes. So that's super fun. Now, all of this, of course, comes at a time where there is a lot of debate going on within conservative circles around sort of the sex education and how much there should be acknowledgement of the fact that while the vast majority of parents who are out there are loving parents who have positive relationships with their kids, there are some parents that haven't built that relationship with their kids. They haven't built that trust. And the kids who are the kids of those parents are the ones who are particularly vulnerable to situations like abuse. This is where a lot of the conversation around pronoun use in schools and GSAs has come up, because schools are supposed to be theoretically one of the safe spaces for kids to go to, where if they aren't allowed to be who they are, to be themselves at home, they can at least go to school and those schools will acknowledge who they are. And there doesn't have to be any mandatory notification. This has been a hotbed issue across the country where multiple provinces have now said, nope, if a kid wants to change their name or their pronouns, heaven forbid, then the parents have to be notified. Now, there's all kinds of questions that come up into this, because if a kid's enrolled in school under the name Patrick, does that mean that teachers have to get written permission before they call Patrick Pat, if that's what Patrick wants to be called? It's a very poorly thought out argument and a poorly thought out policy, but it's one that the UCP has been very, very clear on the heels of their Lake of Fire AGM that there's discussions going on in the UCP caucus. So there are some people who want to make a law in the province of Alberta which would have to utilize the notwithstanding clause. It's worth noting the last time that the notwithstanding clause was used in the province of Alberta was to outlaw gay marriage. So great track record. But there's apparently a good number of people in the UCP caucus who want to see a law brought forward utilizing the notwithstanding clause that would say, hey, you know what? If parents want to be notified of any changes to their kids' gender identity or to their pronoun use, then that's something that the parents have to be notified of before teachers can do that. Now, again, for the vast majority of parents out there, this is probably a non-issue. But what we're talking about is a very small minority of parents who apparently don't want to be bothered to build that relationship with their kids so that their kids feel safe with them, or who are, quite frankly, not people that their kids are safe to be their real and authentic selves with, for a whole list of reasons. And it's really tragic. And the statistics bear out that kids who are in those types of environments and have those types of families are disproportionately vulnerable to all kinds of horrible things, not limited in any way to, but including things like sexual assault, things like self-harm, things like suicide, things like houselessness and homelessness. Kids don't tell their parents these things because kids don't feel safe telling their parents these things. And for the state to make the decision that kids don't get to have any safe places is a pretty stunning overreach. And it's one of the reasons why, where there have been other provinces that have done this, there has been tremendous public uproar, and there has also had to be the use of the notwithstanding clause. This is what's going on in Alberta schools right now. Now, all of this is going on at the same time where teachers are talking about anything but that, because it's been widely established teachers do not have the time, nor the resources, nor the energy, or nor, quite frankly, the inclination to try to change a kid's sexuality or gender or any of those things. Teachers are overwhelmed. And one of the problems that exists, one of the reasons why teachers are so overwhelmed, is because the education system in the province of Alberta is unbelievably underfunded. From a recent op-ed written by ATA President Jason Schilling, Alberta schools are by far the lowest funded pure pupil in the country. As a result, we have a significantly higher ratio of students to teachers than every other province. Public education in Alberta would need an increase of, and brace yourselves because this is a big number, 1.2 billion with a B to bring Alberta just to the Canadian funding average. That is how cripplingly low and how underfunded the education system is. And those are the topics that teachers are wanting to talk about. Teachers are wanting to talk about the fact that they are seeing class sizes growing incrementally every year. They want to talk about the fact that they don't have the resources that they need to try to make sure that kids get a good education. They want to talk about the fact that the administrative burden that's being placed on them is crushing. You talk to any teachers who are involved with the public education system, and they'll be happy to tell, probably not happy, exhausted, sad, burnt out to tell you that they simply do not have the time or energy for the battles that people like Monique LaGrange are trying to bring to the table. They're just trying to tread water and get their kids, their students, through the curriculum and make sure that those students have a quality education. These are all the conversations that we should be having when we're talking about education. But because there are people who believe that the Holy Spirit told them to post Nazi memes, those conversations are all being distracted from. And it's unfortunate. But at the same time, it's also important to remember that Monique LaGrange was a school board trustee. She had managed to get herself into a position of power and influence. Now, fortunately, some people might say, her own inability to step outside her myopic worldview resulted in her being removed from a position where she could influence policies. But again, this is where we have to remind everybody and talk about the fact that Take Back Alberta and David Parker, who take credit for getting rid of Premier Jason Kenney and who take credit for getting Danielle Smith elected as premier, well, first as leader of the UCP and then premier, Take Back Alberta is saying that they want to take over all of the school boards in the province of Alberta. That's going to be their number one mission. That's going to be their number one goal. And so we have to have these conversations because if you can imagine, there were 7 people on that school board. Now, fortunately, there was only one Monique LaGrange. But if you can imagine what one school board with 7 Monique LaGranges, or realistically even 4, the kind of damage that they could do to the education system and the quality of kids' education, it's unfortunately not a thing that we can take a walk on. Moving on from there, we got to talk about housing for a little bit. November 14th, the federal government announced they would be giving $228 million for affordable housing to Calgary as part of a deal to see 35,000 new affordable housing units by 2035. Now, there's obviously, for anybody who's been listening to the show for the last couple of weeks, affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing has been a pretty big part of the conversation, especially on the open mic side of the thing, because we have members of our audience who have directly been impacted by the lack of availability of affordable housing. So the Fed's coming forward with $228 million to ensure that the city of Calgary makes available 35,000 new affordable housing units by 2035. We're talking 11 years, 12 years away. That's huge. That is something that you would think would be absolutely celebrated. But of course, we live in Alberta. Didn't take very long for Rick McIver to come forward and air his concerns. So Rick McIver is the Municipal Affairs Minister, and he released a whole statement about overreach and how unacceptable it was that the federal government would dare to talk to municipalities. The subject, the headline, protecting Alberta's constitutional jurisdiction. Municipal Affairs Minister Rick McIver issued the following statement after comments and actions from the federal government on agreements with municipalities. I'm concerned about the repeated public comments from the federal government and Federal Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, Sean Fraser, indicating they will continue to deal directly with municipalities. This morning, Minister Fraser even hinted at his government's interest in meddling with the provincial and municipal decision-making around short-term housing. This is just the federal government's latest attempt to bypass Alberta and other provincial governments and overstep their authority. Our government intends to protect and ensure Alberta's constitutional right to oversee the governance of Alberta's municipalities. It goes on further, but then they have some quick facts. And the first bullet point is very much a clear threat. Municipalities in Alberta are created and governed by the Municipal Government Act. So we have Minister McIver coming out and saying, hey, that's not cool that you got a deal for 35,000 affordable housing units. That's not cool. You didn't get our permission to make sure that 35,000 individuals or families are going to have access to housing. That's unacceptable. Now, in and of itself, that would be pretty embarrassing that a provincial government would, instead of celebrating an announcement like this and taking some ownership in a celebratory way, instead of doing that, making the decision to say, we're supposed to have control over that. That's part of our jurisdiction. When it's very clearly not. The federal government can make deals. Municipal governments can make deals. Just how it works. But that would be embarrassing enough if it wasn't for the fact that it was Rick McIver who was making this statement. Rick McIver, who got his start in politics working with, wait for it, the Calgary City Council. Rick was a city councilor from 2001 to 2010. And for 3 years, and I wish I was making this up, but I'm not, he was the chair of the Calgary Housing Company. So if anyone in provincial government right now should be able to appreciate the importance of municipal governments being able to make these sorts of negotiations with the federal governments to ensure that 35,000 affordable housing units get created. One would think it would be the person who served on municipal government for 9 years before he ran for mayor, and who was the chair of the Calgary Housing Company. It's mind-blowing that this level of partisanship is the kinds of things that Rick McIver apparently believes that he needs to put his time into. Moving on from housing, we're going to put an energy category on the table because there's been some pretty significant energy developments in the last couple of weeks. And they're worth talking about. Amazon, much to, I'm sure, Danielle Smith's chagrin, announced that they are building a wind farm in Alberta for when the sun blows, I guess. No, the wind blows. Sun blows, wind blows, sun shines. It's so hard to tell. Danielle Smith gets it mixed up. I get lost. Apparently, though, wind power is a reliable enough source of energy that Amazon has said that it's going to partner with developer Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners on a 495 megawatt capacity wind farm to be built in Vulcan County in southern Alberta. The announcement marks Amazon's fourth renewable energy project in Canada and comes on the heels of the recent opening of the company's Traverse Solar Project, which is also located in southern Alberta and is the largest solar farm ever constructed in Canada. So Amazon, and there's a lot to be said about Amazon and their business model, but they're successful. Amazon has found solar and wind to be reliable enough that they're building their own private power farms for solar and wind to power their company. The goal is to help power Amazon's local operations in Alberta, including its fulfillment centers, sortation centers, delivery centers, and Amazon Web Services data center. Amazon has committed to powering its operations with 100% renewable energy by, oh no, it's not 2035. 2035 is unattainable. They're doing it by 2030. When one of the largest companies in the world says, hey, you know what? We can do renewable energy. We can get to net zero power for ourselves with our own money. And we can do it by 2030. That has to call into question, to some degree, Danielle Smith's claims that it's completely impossible to get to a net zero power grid by 2035. It's worth noting that Amazon currently has, it's not a small number, 479 wind and solar projects globally. So this isn't just like, oh, we're doing a one-off in Alberta. This is a major part of their corporate plan for the future. But somehow it's just a bridge too far for the little old province of Alberta. But Amazon aren't the only folks who've made some announcement in regard to renewables. TransAlta also announced that they're going greener. More than 2/3 of its profits will come from renewable energy electricity production by 2028. The company's going to invest $3.5 billion, focused mainly on clear energy generation and storage capacity by the end of 2028, which, and we checked a calendar to be sure, is actually 7 years before the 2035 goal that's been put forward by the federal government that Danielle Smith just hates so very much. The Calgary-based company, which has bought online more than 800 megawatts of wind and solar power since 2021 alone, said it will add an additional 1,750 megawatts of clean power within the next 5 years by 2028, and frankly, even earlier, somewhere in the range of 70% of their earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization will come from renewables. So this is a pretty big deal. We're seeing some of the major players of power making the move. And their goals are significantly earlier than 2035. Kind of blows some holes in a narrative that Danielle Smith has been trying to sell Albertans. But while renewables, despite the fact that the renewables moratorium continues, so these are projects that are going ahead in spite of the fact that a regulatory environment has been created to make it harder for those projects to go ahead. In spite of all of that, these projects are still going ahead. That speaks to the momentum. But while renewables have had an amazing week, couple of weeks, oil and gas, a little bit less so. We've talked many times on the show about the oil sands tailing seepage that happened at the Curl site. So the Imperial Oil Curl site in northern Alberta. There was multiple stories that went on about how there was seepage from some of their tailings ponds. And originally it was like, it hasn't affected animals. And then folks who live up there, Indigenous and First Nations folks who live up there, took some pictures. And it turns out, no animals did. And then they said, well, it's cool because it hasn't leaked into any of the water table. And then they proved that it had. So that's bad, right? I think we could all agree that tailing seepage is bad. Where it gets worse is that they knew about it for years and years and years. But of course, if it was just a one-off, it wouldn't be a big deal, right? Well, it turns off not a one-off because there's been some other problems. Now, on November 15th, Brian Jean attended the Curl site, and he had nothing but good things to say. Minister of Energy, good to tour the Curl oil sands project today. Their commitment to environmental protection is top notch. And if you could leave it there, that'd be cool, but you can't, because Emma Graney, who is another amazing reporter, on November 21st published a story that showed that Curl had a water release that had occurred. Documents filed by Imperial Oil showed that 670,000 liters of water was released into the Muskeg River, according to the regulator. Now, Brian Jean had some thoughts that he wanted to share on this issue in the legislature.
Of Energy and Minerals.
Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity to visit the Curl site last week, and I will tell you that I did see some issues that, and I did raise them with the management there, and I have raised them with the senior management. But, Mr. Speaker, this particular spill is from muddy water from the surrounding area. It's not part of the tailings pond issue. It's just muddy water, Mr. Speaker. And that muddy water is actually from rain and from snow. They might not be aware of that, but in the north it actually does snow. And, Mr. Speaker, that has been stopped, and indeed water monitoring, air monitoring continues to be done and will be continued to be done in the future.
That's just muddy water leaking into the water table. Why would that possibly be bad? It's not like there's, fish or wildlife or anything that rely on that water, and it's not like fish can't breathe in muddy water. Oh wait, that's exactly what it's like. So to dismiss an oil leak, not an oil leak, a leak of muddy water as, it's just muddy water, is really quite either disingenuous or demonstrates how little the Minister of Energy actually knows about the environmental implications of water that has 140 milligrams of suspended solids per liter, which is 4 times the legal limit to be released. So it's not just that it's muddy water, it's really muddy water. And tragically, this prompted a response from the Athabasca Chippewa First Nations. Again, the number of responses that the Athabasca Chippewa First Nations have had to put into the ether because of the failure of these oil and gas companies to live up to the bare minimum standards is really quite heartbreaking, because they do it all the time. They released a statement on November 23rd. This week, Athabasca Chippewa First Nations learned that an incident has occurred at Exxon Imperial's Curl Oil Sands facility that once again impacted the environment on our traditional territories. This time, 670,000 liters of treated water escaped from a settling pond in the Muskeg River. The water contained approximately 140 milligrams of suspended solids per liter, more than 4 times the legal limit. This follows a series of extremely serious incidents earlier this year, including a faulty tailings pond that leaked toxic fluid for over 9 months before being reported, and a massive drainage pond spill of over 5 million liters of toxic tailings in February of 2023. So there's no moratorium on any of these things. We'll pump the brakes on the solar and the wind because somebody might have to clean up some concrete. But when you juxtapose that against the damage that's caused by these repeated leaks from just the Curl site, it raises a lot of questions, and questions that if Brian Jean was there to represent Albertans and not oil companies, one could presume he would speak to a little bit more enthusiastically than just trying to dismiss it as only muddy water. There are multiple data points when it comes to leaking from the Curl site. Multiple data points indicate a pattern. But that's not what Mr. Jean chose to address. Instead, Mr. Jean chose to make it very clear that his concerns are far less with the environmental impact and far more with continued support for these oil and gas companies. And you could look at it and go, it's just one company, except it's not. It's not at all. Suncor was announced by the Alberta Energy Regulator that on November 24th, 2023, Suncor informed the AAR that further investigation of a leak of those also muddy water indicated that the unplanned release volume, that's a fascinating way of saying spill. It's a fascinating way of positioning it. The unplanned release volume may have been closer to 10,000 cubic meters, which is 100 million liters, I want to say. Suncor has also informed the AR that the unplanned release may have been in effect since June of 2022. So Suncor had this unplanned release going on for a year and a half. They believe the cause of the release is likely to be a faulty valve. Now, you have to wonder how much inspection, how much diligence is being placed on and monitoring these things when you can have an unplanned release that goes on for a year and a half. It's absolutely wild. Moving on from there. We're going to talk about the healthcare disaster situation. I mean, whatever we want to call it in the province of Alberta. Danielle Smith has repeatedly said, she could fix healthcare in 90 days. And by fix healthcare, apparently what she meant was she would watch as healthcare got worse, arguably, than it's ever been. So bad, in fact, that in Edmonton, they have started capping in Edmonton hospitals. Doctor and hospitals in Alberta, Edmonton, and other Alberta communities have been unable to admit patients from emergency rooms in a timely manner because some wards are well over capacity. Dr. Paul Parks, the president of the Alberta Medical Association, the body that advocates on behalf of province's physicians, says recent feedback from doctors in the capital city indicates some departments are filled well over capacity with patients, in some cases more than 50% over capacity. Now, what this has resulted in, doctors have to make the decision that they're simply not going to admit any more people to those units because they're too full, like 50% over capacity full. And what that means is it creates a backlog into the emergency rooms. Where emergency rooms, people who are trying to get emergency care, are now having to wait longer and longer and longer periods of time because they can't get into the emergency room because the emergency room can't move the people that are already in the emergency room out of the emergency room. Now, there's a lot going on in this situation. And one of the things that we have to talk about is the fact that many stakeholders have said that Danielle Smith's decision to implode healthcare in the province of Alberta may actually make things worse. There's been many experts, legal, health, otherwise, who've come forward and said, during a time of crisis, maybe isn't the best time to try to restructure everything in a completely chaotic and largely unplanned way. Nonetheless, that's what's going on. And there's been a lot of criticism that's gone on with how Danielle Smith decided to go ahead and blow up healthcare as hospitals are so full that they can't admit patients anymore. From an article in the Tyee, she neglected to consult with some key stakeholders, including the United Nurses of Alberta, for example, which is a troublesome echo of how Smith imposed a 7-month moratorium on solar and wind projects without first consulting with the renewable industry how this would be affected. Another quote, "This is an unprecedented change that came really without any notice, no consultation with any providers or patients that I'm aware of," complained Dr. Tom Noseworthy, a health professor emeritus at the University of Calgary, in an appearance on CBC Radio Alberta at noon last Thursday. Now, this tragically goes in line with some DMs that we've been receiving over the last couple of weeks over just how bad things are actually. And one of them confirms the capping. At least one YEG, or Edmonton Area Hospital, is adding beds to their medicine units by cramming beds and stretchers everywhere they can. 2-bed rooms are now 3-bed, but staffing hasn't ramped up to match the increase in patients. Today, there's a nursing healthcare attendant shortage due to illness that is resulting in elderly patients with fall risks being asked to toilet in diapers because there isn't enough staff to safely transfer them from a bed to a toilet. It's awful for patients and staff. Another one, at least 85% of patients in ED are on ISO precautions. In case anyone was wondering how things are going in Edmonton acute, COVID-19, flu A, RSV rampant. Another one. Please keep this anonymous, but Danielle Smith has failed Albertans. She said she was going to fix EMS. Then she said she did, but she's so obsessed with her implosion of HS that she can't see that no one cares about her rules for EMS not waiting in hospitals at all anymore. In my hospital today in Calgary, there were paramedic crews waiting all the way down the hallway. Smith can't even follow through on things she announced almost a year ago. I don't understand how anyone thinks she can get anything meaningful done. And that's not an unfair question. It's worth noting that Danielle Smith talked quite a bit about how she had fixed the EMS crisis and how paramedics weren't going to wait in hallways anymore. But from the DMs and certainly from anecdotal reports on media and social media, that policy itself has already fallen apart. So the changes that she tried to implement when we had an intact healthcare system have already failed. What are going to happen to the changes that she tries to implement when we don't have an intact healthcare system? It's not great, especially when it comes on the heels of promises like we saw from Adriana LaGrange on Real Talk, not Truth Talk, Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson.
The table and what's not when it comes to privatization?
Nothing is on the table in terms of privatization. I can't be more clear on this, Ryan. We are not privatizing healthcare in Alberta. It is a publicly funded, publicly delivered healthcare system, and that will continue. What we are focused on is really improving service delivery.
Are you saying no private surgical clinics? You're saying no private operators in any context? No hospitals are for sale? No long-term care centers are for sale? There's no fine print? There's no privatization plan, period?
There is no privatization of healthcare. We adhere to the Alberta Health Insurance Act, and we also adhere to the Canada Health Act. And those items, those areas that are insured, those surgeries and medical procedures that are insured will continue to be insured and covered.
And this is again where fun with words becomes one of the biggest games that the UCP loves to play. Because what Minister LaGrange is talking about there is no privatization. There won't be any private clinics, which is to say there won't be any clinics or surgical facilities where if I don't want to wait through the public system, I can drop $20,000 and get my knee replaced at a private clinic and I can skip over all the lines, because that would be against the Canada Health Act. It would be illegal. We can't do that. That's the kind of privatization that Adriana LaGrange is talking about there. But there's a new word that we've coined over here, which is profitization. Because what the new process that has been created by Danielle Smith and arguably Rob Anderson, because this was his plan like years ago, but what this new process allows for is for private companies to deliver services on behalf of the public healthcare system. But private companies, of course, have to have a profit margin. So while there will continue to be Alberta Health Services, when we're talking about mental health and addiction services, there's lots of room for private companies to use public funds to provide those services to the public through a public system and make a healthy profit. And Danielle Smith has said in multiple other places, you know, it would be great if Alberta Health Services became Alberta Hospital Services. And if we don't like how they're doing things, why gosh, we can always get a group of other people, a private company, to come in and run that hospital. It's not that the hospital's for sale. We're using a different contractor. And Danielle Smith has referred to Alberta Health Services as a contractor now. On the secret PowerPoint that was released, it was very, very clear. Alberta Health Services is now in the contracted providers category. So it's not privatization, it's profitization. It's creating a mechanism that private companies, for-profit companies, can come in, hook themselves up to the public purse, and get a profit. And as multiple healthcare experts, not just in Alberta, but across the country, have said, and certainly we saw during the pandemic in long-term care homes, when you start to do things for profit, if it's done at the same price as not for profit, corners get cut. Quality of care suffers. That in and of itself should be cause for alarm for, I don't know, pretty much everybody. But it's also worth remembering who's saying those things. Because Adriana LaGrange hasn't always been the health minister. She was the education minister for a good chunk of time. And she had some comments that she said publicly as well in 2019 about the state of Alberta's education system.
What I hear a lot coming from the opposition is constant fear-mongering, and it creates a lot of unease amongst the system and amongst parents, and I really feel that's reprehensible. Right now, we've been very cognizant of telling everyone that we have accounted for enrollment growth, that we are going to continue to build schools, and that we have kept education as a priority for our government. And I just want to reiterate that and ensure that everyone out there hears that very loudly and very clearly.
Adriana LaGrange said, we're funding for classroom growth. Let me go back and read that paragraph that I read from ATA President's Jason Schilling's article from just last week. Alberta schools are by far the lowest funded pure pupil in the country. As a result, we have significantly higher ratio of students to teachers than every other province. Public education in Alberta would need an increase of $1.2 billion with a B to bring Alberta just to the Canadian funding average. So it's a little bit, even if we want to ignore the whole profitization piece, it's a little bit difficult to just go, oh, okay, Adriana, your track record's pretty solid. Staying within the healthcare realm and moving on from there, we're going to talk about another new program that was announced. This is the nurse practitioner program that has been just recently announced. The province of Alberta announced that Alberta's nurse practitioners will be able to open own clinics by next year. And there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of ambiguity going on because there's some people who are saying some numbers and there's other people who are saying other numbers. Don't worry, we have a clip of that for our Stuff Smith Says segment that's coming up in just a bit. But the information that has been released is that there's going to be a $2 million grant over the next 3 years for the Nurse Practitioner Association of Alberta to help implement a compensation model, recruit other nurse practitioners to participate and provide supports as they work to set up their own clinics. Now, there's going to be a billing model of some kind that will have a bonus setup, which during the announcement, and if you go to any of the official government documentation, says very clearly, we don't know what that's going to look like yet. We have some clips we're going to play later. But the response to this has been pretty strong because one of the things that's gone on and on is Danielle Smith has said, depending on the moment, that nurse practitioners, and I want to be really clear before we get into this, not in any way denigrating nurse practitioners. Nurse practitioners play a pivotal role in providing care in a variety of different ways, but particularly in communities that don't have access to a family physician. And they work collaboratively in most cases with a physician. There's a lot of things that nurse practitioners can deal with. And I do not want anyone to interpret this segment as saying, nurse practitioners, they're no good. Because they absolutely are good. Nurse practitioners are awesome. But if we're going to have a conversation about the difference between a nurse practitioner and a physician, then we should be able to have a conversation about what that difference is without a boatload of damaged egos. And the reality is there's some pretty big differences, not only in regards to the scope of practice, but also in regards to the amount of training and the amount of on-the-job experience, if you will, that somebody has to have before they can practice on their own as a family physician, for example. So the AMA has come out pretty strong defending the idea of family medicine. So in a letter released on November 22nd, the section of family medicine agrees wholeheartedly with the government statement that too many Albertans cannot find family doctors. We do, however, have serious, very serious concerns regarding the messaging that family physicians are in some way replaceable or exchangeable with nurse practitioners. This is quite simply not true. There's no question that nurse practitioners have undergone a significant amount of professional training. However, that training is not the equivalent of medical school. An RN is not an MD. Anyone who's tempted to think so need only examine the two curriculums. It is true that NPs have 2 years of training on top of their RN degree, but that does not change the fundamentals. Nurses are not doctors. NPs are not family physicians. It goes on quite a bit to talk more about that. But the reality is there's a pretty big difference. And there's a lot of family physicians who have taken to social media and other places to say, hey, you know what? Working in a collaborative environment with nurse practitioners can absolutely be a tremendous gain for the healthcare system. But we need to talk about what we're talking about. And with so much apparently in the air in regards to what these programs are going to look like and how they're going to be deployed, there's a lot of questions that remain that the government has chosen to instead launch a program without actually having the program, which I guess is pretty on brand. One more topic in the subject of healthcare, and that has to do with respiratory virus season. There's been a lot of people lately. We've had a lot of people for some reason popping up on our Twitter machine and some of our other social medias where they've been saying, the healthcare system is just it's having a hard time, but it's only because it's flu season. It's just influenza. It's just the flu. And there's a lot of people who have said that the respiratory dashboard that the province has set up, it's a little bit misleading. It makes it very hard to track data. We have a conversation with somebody who has that opinion coming up on Wednesday or tomorrow for our Patreon supporters. A little bit more about that later. But when we take a look at what the numbers are actually like for how the healthcare system is being impacted, well, from November 12th to November 18th, there were 75 influenza hospital admissions. Now, it's important to be clear. These numbers are for. These are not with. So if somebody was admitted for influenza, they're one of those 75. How does it compare to COVID-19? 387 people in hospital. What about ICU? Well, there's 11 in ICU for influenza and 13 for COVID. But where it gets really stark and where the impact on not just hospitalizations, not just healthcare, but on human life is when we start to talk about the deaths. In the last week, from November 12th to November 18th, there were 3 deaths from influenza, bringing it to a total of 11 this season. And I want to be really clear before I go on to the next number. Those deaths are absolutely tragic. And every single one of those represents the loss of a loved one to someone. It should not be in any way perceived as being minimized. And in fact, if you take a look at what we normally see in an influenza season, those numbers are a little bit on the high side. When we compare it to COVID, there have been 5 deaths in the last week and 220 this season. 220 compared to 11. Now, every single one of those deaths is a tragedy. And like I said, every single one of those deaths represents the loss of a loved one for someone. But to try to minimize what the healthcare system is experiencing, to try to say, oh no, you know what? It's just flu season, is incredibly misinformed. And if it's coming from anybody who works in healthcare or anyone who's in a position of leadership, it's also incredibly disingenuous. Moving on from there. We got to talk about a little bit of Presto Changeo Manning report. Preston Manning released his report, and it's been pretty fun to watch it get panned. There's been a lot of problems with the Manning report. Whether or not we want to talk about the fact that they utilized a sole-sourced secondment report, principle-based criteria review and amendment recommendations for Alberta's emergency management, public health legislation, and applicable subordinate legislation, prepared by Gerald A. Lukashin, I'm hoping, who's got a BA and an MA. Hey, what else has Gerald done? Oh, right. Gerald's got some thoughts about geography. In fact, Gerald's the guy who came up with the option that, hey, you know what would solve a lot of Alberta's problems? You know what would solve a lot of Saskatchewan's problems? What if they just took over half of the provinces next door? What if Saskatchewan just took over, I don't know, half of Manitoba? How would that go? What if Alberta just took over the northern half of BC? Not like that's all largely unceded territories that doesn't technically belong to Canada, so you couldn't actually take it anyways, and it's a whole legal and treaty shit show trying to untangle that mess. What if Alberta just took all of that? Yeah, it's that Gerard Lukashin. And it's worth noting that these ideas have a tendency of spreading, metastasizing. Danielle Smith, a little while back, just interviewed Gerard Lukashin from the Frontier Centre about redrawing Alberta's and Saskatchewan's borders to correct an historic wrong and give us access to deepwater ports at Prince Rupert and Churchill. What say you, BC, Manitoba? I mean, if you want to talk about historic wrongs on that map, Alberta is the one who's got the claims to the historic wrong title. Again, we should talk about the unceded territories that are on that map because it's historic wrong. That's some pretty fertile ground. Just the fact that this is who was used to write a sole source seconded report. My personal favorite, though, is this little footnote here. It's footnote 21, and it wants you to see footnote 21 to get the answer to what footnote 21 is. You should just see footnote 21. It's a loop, which is fun. It's like a amusement park ride that goes nowhere, except this report found its way all the way to the Premier's office. And as CBC reporter Jason Markusoff did an excellent job of pointing out, a lot of the report is actually in parallel with the fan fiction that Mr. Manning wrote coming out of COVID-19. For anyone who's not familiar, Mr. Manning wrote a fictional work, I guess is what we have to call it, the report of the COVID Commission. And look, he made the maple leaf look all COVID-y. It's creative choices from Mr. Manning there. Described as a fictional futuristic depiction of relevant political developments in the post-COVID period in Canada. It's got everything. It's got violence. It's got a love story. It's got a new government of the people, convoy style. There's a lot that goes on in this. And it's fascinating how much of it parallels, how many of the recommendations parallel in the COVID Commission to the report that Preston Manning was actually paid. He was paid personally $250,000 and change to write the report, but he was given a budget of $2 million taxpayer dollars to come up with this thing that's largely, from the CBC story, a copy-pasta version of his fictional COVID Commission report. Response concluded that emergency management agencies should lead over the health department, demanded economic impact assessments for any health protections, and criticized the court's deference to demonstrably justifiable limits on freedoms. With respect to expert advice, the panel suggests that the non-scientific evidence should be considered. Non-scientific evidence. Just going to let that phrasing marinate for a second. Non-scientific evidence. I don't know what that would be because evidence is scientific. It's very confusing. And that elected officials and the emergency management agency should be open to considering and investigating alternative scientific narratives and hypotheses, even at the risk of acknowledging some uncertainty as to which scientific narratives are most relevant to the emergency at hand. So it's pretty clear what we're talking about at that point. We're talking about the hydroxychloroquine, and the ivermectin. Is what we're talking about there. But it gets even better. It really does. It gets so much better because George Chahal on November 20th, put out a tweet where he released an email with some redacted email addresses, names still intact, where he talked about this email that he received. Last week, I received a very candid email from Preston Manning about his Alberta taxpayer-funded COVID-19 review panel. Take a look. A couple of excerpts we're going to read you here. There may be some material. Now, I got to say beforehand, George Chahal appears to have received this by accident because most of the other names on that email list, which weren't even BCC'd. Most of the other names, heavy hitters in the federal conservative movement. This is a couple of the experts. There may be some material in this report that could be used by the CPC to say what should have been done to cope with the COVID crisis and what should have been done to cope with future public emergencies. Some of its content may also be useful in attacking the record of the Liberal NDP coalition in this area. So he produced the report, and then it wasn't that somebody said, hey, is there anything in this report that could be useful for political advantageous? No, he produced the report and then he said, hey, Conservative Party of Canada, I wrote this report for you. I think you might like it. There's some things you can use to whack the Liberals and the NDP with. But then it gets even better. It seems to me there would be real merit in developing a close practical relationship here in Alberta between the UCP and the CPC. They need your support for some of their initiatives, such as promoting and implementing the recommendations of the report, and you could use their active support for your re-election in 2024. What I'm wondering is whether a small task force composed of interested PC MPs and UCP folks could be put together to jointly pursue this objective. Everyone benefits, especially Alberta. So, as much as Danielle Smith and the UCP like to say, the provincial NDP, they're connected with the federal NDP, and they're working with Justin Trudeau. Here is Preston Manning making the argument. Hey, you know what would be great? Maybe if the federal conservatives and the provincial conservatives in Alberta formalize their relationship and establish some working groups, and you could use the report that I wrote as bond. It could be the glue that holds everything together. I wish I was making this up, but I'm not. And all of that being said, got one more section, one more chunk to get into before we open up our open mic. And we've already got, like I said, a couple folks that are teed up, queued up, have already said they got some thoughts that they want to share. So I'm thinking tonight's going to be spicy. But it's time for our becoming regular segment, Stuff Danny Says. That one gets me almost as much as the BS meter, which you know we're going to play later. But Danny's had a busy couple weeks. We take a weekend off, and we got all of this backlog to work through. We're going to start with the announcement of rural Alberta internet with the Starlink pilot program. So it was announced that households and businesses in key rural areas, which happen to be most of southern Alberta, almost as if those are areas that were kind of close in the last election. Some people might speculate. I don't know if that's true or not. They get a rebate for the purchase of new hardware for high-speed satellite internet through Elon Musk's Starlink. Now, there's a couple things that we got to be clear about. So thing number one is this is not the provincial government putting forward infrastructure or making an investment in infrastructure to ensure that communities that don't have access to high-speed broadband internet right now are able to maintain access to high-speed broadband internet right now. What they're saying is, if you live in these certain areas, then we'll pay for you to get Elon Musk's Starlink internet. So this is very much in the realm of a corporate subsidy / sales pitch. And if it wasn't for the fact that Danny's had some thoughts about Starlink in the past, you might be able to just go, oh, you know what? It's a good thing they're doing. She's getting people internet. But there's a little bit more to it than that. It wasn't very long ago during the leadership race that Danielle Smith capitalized on the questions around C18. And there was a series of tweets that she put up. The first one, did you know at Justin Trudeau, internet censorship law will mean liberal partisans can pick and choose what Albertans can say and express on the internet? That's patently false. We made fun of that when she first put it up because it's just false. There's nothing true about that at all. But she later retweeted it and said, hey, Elon Musk. And she added him. I'm running to be Premier of Alberta. We still value free speech here. Could Alberta set up an independent ISP using Starlink to bypass the new Justin Trudeau internet censorship law? So again, it seems like another one of those examples of once Danny gets an idea in her head, she just kind of can't get it out, and it just stays there, and she runs with it. And perhaps the next little story that we got to talk about is another perfect example of that. So yet again, we got to talk about the children's pain medication, because it's another example of a great idea that Danny had that went completely sideways and ended up costing Albertans literally tens, you could even say $100 million, depending on how you choose to do the math. We're talking, of course, back to her announcement where she said, hey, you know what, there's a shortage of children's Tylenol. That's not good. I know the federal government has said that they're working to resolve these issues, but I think I'm going to own the libs and take care of things myself. And to recap, every time I have to do this recap, it hurts a little bit, but it also makes me giggle a little bit. To recap, what Danny said at the time was, you know what, the traditional manufacturers, they've said they're working with the feds or something, so we're going to go all the way to Turkey. And there's this company called Atabay Pharmaceuticals. They don't actually make the meds in the format that we need them. They make the precursors. So they make the ingredients. So it's kind of like going to an auto parts store to buy a car. You're going to have to pay a premium. Danny was very clear about the fact we're going to have to pay a premium on this, but we're going to get bottles. There's going to be so many bottles. We're going to have the bottles for the pharmacies. We're going to have the bottles for the peoples. We're going to have the bottles. We'll put them in the healthcare system. We're not going to have any shortage at all. And you know what? If we have some extra, which we probably will, because we're buying millions of bottles of medication that will inevitably expire, we're just going to sell it to the other provinces. Well, a couple of stories came out that made it very clear, yeah, that was not going to happen. A story by Matthew Black on November 17th revealed that, no, they knew very early on that other provinces wanted nothing to do with this. A week after the first shipment of the medication arrived, Alberta pitched BC on purchasing some of the medication through a January 25th email with the subject line, Pediatric analgesic update and pulse check. A BC civil servant rejected the offer in an email sent just over 4 hours later. So when a civil servant says, yeah, no, that makes it pretty clear. The response included, our health authorities have been very clear that at least at this time, they will not accept any products that have a different strength than the Canadian product, it reads, referencing paroles, which is then, or payroll, as we like to call it, lower dosage compared to typical acetaminophen. February 21st, an Ontario civil servant wrote back to the Alberta government saying supply had stabilized as a result of prudent management of the shortage by governments and healthcare providers and commitment by manufacturers to meeting demand. Products from Canadian and established foreign suppliers are once again available regularly in Ontario pharmacists and retailers, it reads. At this point, the Ontario Ministry of Health will not be pursuing the purchase of this product. So that's not great. Because when you can't sell these millions of bottles to anyone, it sounds like you might have a little bit of a problem. But it's a Danny story, so you got to know it gets worse. Because Danielle Smith, on November 22nd, published a story that detailed how many of these bottles actually got to any of the places. 4,700 bottles were shipped to Alberta pharmacies. Now, how many of them sold? That's a different question. There were 9,000 bottles that were shipped to hospitals. In total, less than 1% of the 1.5 million bottles received to date were ever distributed from storage facilities for retail or hospital use, and even less was likely actually used to treat sick children. Less than 15,000 of the 1.5, and we're on the hook for like another 3 million more, by the way, which we paid for, wait for it, up front, because of course we did. 15,000, less than 15,000 bottles actually made it to pharmacies or hospitals. What has been the rest of what has been received is being put into cold storage, and the rest of the order, the provincial government is trying to negotiate, well, what can we do to get some value for our money, because we're never, ever going to get any of that money back. 100 million. Now, there's some people who say, it's only 75 million. That's the cost of just the meds. When you include in the shipping costs, and then on top of that, because it was budgeted in as well, the disposal costs, it's been pinned at $100 million. $100 million of taxpayers' money to distribute less than 15,000 bottles of children's fever and pain medication. You have to marvel at the fact that somehow Danielle Smith has been able to survive throwing $100 million of taxpayers' money down the drain. $100 million that she claims that she decided to use to address a healthcare crisis. But as we talked about in our earlier segment on healthcare, there's a much bigger healthcare crisis going on that $100 million could have actually made a pretty sizable dent in some pretty sizable ways. That's a lot of nurses and healthcare workers and physicians that could have been hired. Not saying, just saying. Moving on from there, we got to talk about the conflict of interest rules, because there's been a fun little development that we wanted to highlight a little bit. Some of you might remember there was an announcement that came up. We talked about it last episode, that Danielle Smith was changing the rules for how conflict of interests were to be managed. In particular, what are the size of gifts? What are the things that MLAs and ministers can accept? And it seems to have in no small part stemmed from this conversation, again, on Real Talk.
I have to tell you, I want to be respectful of the position, but there are certain things that we have been told are that I cannot do. For instance, during the stampede, I was told I could only be in the suites for 20 minutes at a time. When I receive ribbon skirts as a matter of protocol, it's been questioned whether I'm allowed to keep them. They're probably only valued at $40. Been told I can't do dishes in my husband's restaurant, even though I'm volunteering to do that. So I just have to say that I think that there are some tweaks we may need.
Now, Smith followed up with that on her weekly radio show as well.
I don't know when the limits came in, but they came in a number of years ago, that it's a conflict of interest to attend any event that has a ticket price of over $200. So I can tell you what it means for me in practice as Premier, that when I get invited to speak at an event, that I'm not permitted to stay and have dinner, because most events these days are $400 or $500 per item when they're doing a charitable event. It means that when I go to the Stampede, so that I can meet the different business leaders at their different suites, the ethics commissioner has said I can only stay in a suite for 20 minutes. And so it's impairing my ability to be able to speak with with individuals in that environment. I mean, Stampede is all about bringing together business deals. And it really, I got invited as well by Gary Bittman to enjoy the Heritage Classic, and I had to decline because I wasn't going to go to a hockey game if I was only able to spend 20 minutes at it. So those are the kinds of things. The other thing that has been raised with me is I receive, as a matter of protocol, often gifts. It's very common in First Nations communities to exchange gifts. And so if it's a work of art or if it's a skirt that is over the $200 limit, that then also initiates a complaint. And so these are just things that you have to do in the course of business. Nobody is in this job so that they can receive gifts or go to these kinds of events. It's just part of what we have to do as politicians. The other part of it is that our staff aren't able to accompany us. And I can tell you there's virtually nowhere that I can go for any length of time without having staff members with me to be able to do the follow-up. So we're trying to get a more reasonable limit than the $200. This is the mechanism to do it. I know we'll get feedback on what that limit should be. We welcome it, but that's the process that we're going through. Is because it's actually interfering in the ability of myself and our ministers to be able to do their work.
Now, there's a lot to unpack in that little diatribe that Smith threw up there, where she said, in order to do the business of government, I have to be in the most opulent surroundings, and I have to be able to go to the fancy suites, and I have to be able to go to the fancy hockey games, because otherwise these business leaders, they just won't meet with me as the premier of the province. Strains credibility a little bit when you actually stop and think about it, because Danielle Smith's argument appears to be the only way that she's going to get audience with these business leaders as premier of the province is if she goes to them when they've got the time to hang out at a hockey game. Or the Stampede. And that may very well have been true when she was a radio show host or when she was a lobbyist. But now that she's the premier of the province, the only reason to go to the places that have the perks is so you can enjoy the perks, which means you're using your elected office as means not to represent your constituents, not to build business relationships, but because you want the perks. The notion that any of these big business leaders would turn down the opportunity. Danielle Smith said, hey, I'd like to talk to the president of Suncor. You think the president of Suncor is going to say, I'd love to, but I've got a hockey game. Or I'd love to, but I'm going to the Stampede that day. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. Danielle Smith is the premier of the province of Alberta. If she wants to have a meeting with the business people, she just has to say, hey, I'd like to have a meeting with you, business person. And she'll get that meeting. She hasn't been able to switch out of lobbyist gear, which is really quite remarkable when you actually stop and think about it. But to the greater point, Danielle Smith said, oh, you know what? I don't really know. I don't know when these limits were put in. And thanks to one of a friend of the show, we'll call him, did a little bit of research, and he figured it out. And a shocking turn of events to some, it goes all the way back to 2014. Oh, wait, it wasn't the NDP? Oh. And in fact, it was actually former Minister of Justice Jonathan Dennis that introduced the rules that determined how much, what's the ethical limit for how much ministers and MLAs and the premier should be able to accept. But if that isn't wild enough for you, that it was a conservative justice minister who brought this in, if that's not wild enough for you, then what should really be wild enough for you is the response of the Wild Rose at the time. Because none other than Rob Anderson had some thoughts about the measures that Mr. Dennis had put in. If you're going to have transparency, if you're going to have accountability, things are going to all be done in public above board. It's important to have these things in legislation. Anderson thinks the bill is a good first step, but said the key is whether or not Premier Jim Prentice makes his government follow the new rules. Instead of looking for loopholes, will he instead do everything in his power to not allow for these loopholes? And arguably, that's exactly what has happened here. Because Danielle Smith, instead of looking for the loopholes, has just gotten rid of the things that would have made the loops in the first place. She's just gotten rid of all of the rules. So I guess you don't have to allow for loopholes when you don't have any rules preventing you from, I don't know, taking advantage of your position to get gifts that you otherwise wouldn't get, that distract you from your role as an elected official, that many argue actually could run the risk of influencing your decisions. Moving on from there. Another question that came up on the Danielle Smith I Still Have My Radio show had to do with education and had to do with class sizes.
Planning to do to help with our public education. It is literally crumbling. Not everyone can afford private. It's every child's right to a good education.
We have had targeted funding that has gone to a number of things, because I think education assistants are very important to be that extra hands on deck in every classroom, especially as we have more complexity and higher needs. And so we have given sort of a dedicated additional amount that is intended to provide some of that support. We also know that for a period of time, we were declining in enrollment. That was the big issue that we were facing, is that we were not growing at the rate. We had 13 quarters of out-migration. And as a result, we had to create a funding model that would stabilize funding for those boards that were losing enrollment. So that was the initial reason why we changed the funding model. Well, now we're in a situation where we're growing in leaps and bounds. So our education minister has already brought it forward to cabinet that we need to make some adjustments to make sure that we're keeping up with growth. So it is a budget process that we have to go through. The budget comes down in February, but that's just how quickly things have turned around. I mean, you have to remember, we've been able to have incredible success in attracting people to our province in the last year. We're growing at a rate that is almost unprecedented. I don't think we've seen these numbers since 1981. And it is our job to make sure that we're managing and keeping up with growth. There are a little bit of pressure points that happen from time to time as we're working through that process. But I can tell you, my education minister, Dimitrios Nicolaitis, he's already begun the conversation, and we hope we can fix that in the upcoming budget.
Danielle Smith says, you know what? We're going to make sure that education is funded to growth, and you have to know what clip I'm going to play now.
What I hear a lot coming from the opposition is constant fear-mongering, and it creates a lot of unease amongst the system and amongst parents, and I really feel that's reprehensible. Right now, we've been very cognizant of telling everyone that we have accounted for enrollment growth, that we are going to continue to build schools, and that we have kept education as a priority for our government. And I just want to reiterate that and ensure that everyone out there hears that very loudly and very clearly.
Now, another scandal that was pointed out that didn't necessarily make the headlines in the ways that everybody may have wanted them to was something that the NDP actually brought up. The NDP brought up the fact that there has been some pretty significant contracts that have gone to Danielle Smith's besties. They talked about a $700,000 gravy train that's been going on for her friends and for her allies. Now, these are specific to sole source contracts, which mean these are contracts that the government has said, we couldn't get these services from anyone else. Possibly. There's no one else who could do it. So we had to go with these guys. What are you going to do? And some of these contracts get to be pretty interesting pretty quickly. So they talked about some of the controversial contracts included the $253,000 paid to Preston Manning to write his report on COVID. They also criticized $175,000 in contracts awarded to the Alberta Council, a legal and lobbying group run by former Wildrose MLA Shane Saskew. It's also worth noting at this particular point in time that one of the individuals from the Alberta Council was actually the campaign manager for Danielle Smith during her by-election run after she won the UCP leadership. And somehow the Alberta Council got $175,000 in sole source contracts. It's also even more fascinating that same individual who ran Danielle Smith's campaign has been popping up in all of these pictures with Jeremy Nixon. Jeremy Nixon, who was not a successful candidate in the last election, but who did land himself a pretty nice little government job for the Premier's office in Southern Alberta, and who is now running for the open Signal Hill CPC nomination. That same campaign manager from the Alberta Council is showing up in his pictures. It's just the darndest thing. They pointed out that Matthew Alltime, Smith's leadership campaign manager, so for the leadership race, not the by-election, received $142,000 in sole source contracts. Former president of the Wildrose, David Yeager, has received $130,000 in contracts. It all adds up. Now, it's worth noting that when we're talking about the leadership campaign manager, Matthew Alltime, he didn't just get sole source contracts. He got a $1.2 million contract with the government to manage their social media and I guess make memes. I don't know exactly what they do, but we do know that the company that got that $1.2 million contract is the only group that has access to Danielle Smith's Twitter account. They're the only people who manage it. And we know that because we did our FOIP a little while ago. We're waiting for some results of some other FOIPs, by the way. But we did our FOIP a while ago where we asked, hey, who's got access to this thing? And we got the answer. It's just this company. And then all of a sudden, the entire province got unblocked. It's the strangest thing. Moving on from there, we got to talk about the Sovereignty Act. I know that we have a couple of people in the queue who are waiting patiently, and I know that the show's going a little bit longer, but don't worry, we're going to get to the login call in, and then we're going to do our regular open mic, I promise. But we're going to get through these last things really quick if we can. So we got to talk about the Sovereignty Act. A lot of people, Danielle Smith said she was going to do the Sovereignty Act. It was going to put up a shield. It was going to prevent the federal government from doing anything. It was going to let her create laws without any debate in the legislature. And a lot of people went, wait, what? Including a lot of people who are now currently in her cabinet. Weird how that happens. But the Sovereignty Act eventually was introduced, and it was a very watered-down version. A lot of the powers that are afforded in the Sovereignty Act are the same powers that already exist through orders in council, so it's a little bit of a thing. But the story broke on Friday. Danielle Smith is going to invoke the Sovereignty Act on Monday. There's a lot of lawyers who are very, very excited and very, very happy about this because they can't wait to take this thing to court and run it through the ringer, because legal experts across the board have said this thing is an absolute train wreck and will not withstand a challenge. But where it gets really wild is she's using the Sovereignty Act to protest regulations that the federal government is going to introduce to ensure that provinces get to net zero power grids by 2035. But if you listen to what I said there, they haven't actually introduced the regulations or explained what the regulations are going to look like or what the details are. It's not a thing yet. It's something they've said they're going to pursue, but it's not a thing yet. So this is kind of like protesting against a movie for which you've only seen 2 minutes of preview because of what you think is probably going to be in the rest of the movie, even though it hasn't been released yet. So this is the thing that on Monday, Danielle Smith is going to be rolling out the Sovereignty Act. And she was asked about it this weekend, because this story ran on Friday. Your province, your premier. I've still got my radio show, You Can't Stop Me hour, runs on Saturday. And here's what Smith had to say on Saturday.
Published last night says you're going to make good on your threat to invoke the Sovereignty Act next week over the Trudeau government's clean electricity regulations. True or false? And if so, why now? What's the process?
Well, true, but people will have to wait until Monday to see the architecture of it. I've had it with Stephen Guilbeault, the Environment Minister. They've lost 2 court cases now, one at the Supreme Court level, one at a federal court level, saying they have to stay in their lane. Their lane is clearly not electricity. Electricity, if anyone wants to read the Constitution under Section 92, falls to the provinces. And so we have been trying to work collaboratively with them on aligning their targets with our targets, which are 2050. I think that there's a lot of reason to believe that our power generators would be able to get to 2050, but they cannot get to 2035. We will not put our operators at risk of going to jail if they do not achieve if they do not achieve the targets that have been set, which we believe are unachievable. We have to have a reliable grid. We have to have an affordable grid, and we're going to make sure that we defend our constitutional jurisdiction to do that.
All right, so the time is right. Kick them while they're down.
Well, I have to tell you, I don't want to do this. I really did, from the very first conversation I had with Justin Trudeau, say I wanted to work with him on this. We put it together, the table with negotiators, so that we could find areas of common ground. But Stephen Guilbeault, I don't know. He's a maverick. He doesn't seem to care about the law, doesn't care about the Constitution. I do, and we're going to make sure that we assert that.
It seems like Danielle Smith's relationship with Stephen Guilbeault is somehow way more complicated than is known, but she repeats the notion. There's a bunch of things we have to unpack in that clip, but she repeats the notion that I just can't handle it anymore. I can't deal with Stephen Guilbeault. He's the worst. But there's nothing pressing happening here. There's no regulations that have been released. Nobody knows the details of what this is going to look like. It's almost as if this is some sort of performative thing to try to change the channel in some way to detract from some of the major losses that Smith has experienced in regards to, less than 15,000 bottles of children's Tylenol making it on shelves to the cost of $100 million. Or if maybe there's this Alberta pension plan thing. It hasn't worked out the way that just kind of hoping it would. Or maybe there's this Preston Manning report. Maybe we just need we need something else to get people fired up over. Who knows? But again, she repeats the false assertion that CEOs are somehow going to be carted off to jail. And again, it's worth noting how we started off part of our show by talking about the fact Amazon is saying, hey, there's no problem. We're gonna use all of this renewable stuff, even when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, we're still going to be able to power all of our operations through purely renewable. We talked about the fact that TransAlta is making huge investments, and they're planning on getting most of the significant chunk of their income from renewables. So again, it seems like the only person who is saying nah is Danielle Smith, for reasons that defy any sort of sense. But this was just the start off for this weekend's radio show, because she had some thoughts on the nurse practitioner piece as well.
People to be prepared for what it is we're looking at, because we're creating this model first with the nurse practitioners. And as many doctors who want to sign on to this model, we'd be happy to work with them too. So we're going to provide a base fee of $85,000 so that they can cover their administrative costs, get an office, make sure that their overhead is covered, that the lights stay on, that they can get their phones set up. That is going to be something that provides that one level of security. And then we're going to ask them to have a particular size patient panel, minimum of 900 patients, so that we can then have them managing that patient panel on a per patient fee basis. And so that should remove a lot of the administrative burden, should lead to better healthcare, so that doctors can figure out the entire range of ways in which they can treat a patient, whether it's in person, on the phone, email, calls. Like they should be able to manage their practice in a way that doesn't penalize them depending on what works best for them. And it also will allow them to manage to have those additional team members coming in, knowing that they can pay for them because they have a certain amount of patients that they're handling.
So despite the fact that if you go to the government website or if you listen to the announcement, the response was, we don't know what the fee program is going to look like. Apparently, Danielle Smith wants people to know what the fee program is going to look like. There's going to be an $85,000 base amount. And then rather than charging per service, so per thing that you do, you have to carry a certain number of patients, and you'll get paid per patient that you carry on it sounds like, yearly basis. And there's pros and cons to this. It gets a little dangerous. And the way that it gets dangerous is if you're a physician or a nurse practitioner. Let's say nurse practitioner, because she said it's going to be nurse practitioners that get to use this model first. Let's say that you're a nurse practitioner. And as a nurse practitioner, you decide, hey, you know what? I'm going to have 900 patients. And I'm going to get paid the same amount for those 900 patients that sign up to be a patient of mine, no matter how often I see them. Am I going to try to pursue patients that are younger, less complicated, require less of my time? Or am I going to say, hey, I want to take care of the sick patients, the ones who really, really need my care? Now, there are absolutely, and I want to be clear, there are absolutely nurse practitioners and physicians out there who are going to say, I want to take care of the people who need the care the most. I'm going to take care of the senior citizens. I'm going to take care of the people with the complex medical problems. There's absolutely people who are going to do that. But under this model, if you don't think that there are going to be nurse practitioners and, quite frankly, physicians who are going to say, hey, I could do the minimum amount of work or I could do the maximum amount of work and I'm still going to get paid the same, I wonder what I should do. It opens up some very slippery slopes that we maybe don't necessarily want to see in a public healthcare system. But she also talked about physicians and the reasons for the shortage and seemed to assign quite a bit of blame.
Nurse practitioners are going to be providing service to Albertans who currently don't have it. We have 700,000 people who are not connected to a family practice. That's what we're trying to fill, is that gap. I've been asking the docs to see what they can do to expand their practices. I've been doing this for a year. We negotiated a new contract with them to give alternative payments models. Unfortunately, we just weren't seeing progress. Every time I spoke with doctors, I was told about how difficult it is to get doctors to agree to go into family practice. Only 10% of our doctors are graduating as primary care practitioners. Many of them are not opening up their own businesses. They're being physician assistants or they're being hospitalists. And as a result, we just don't have enough of our family doctors practicing that day-to-day family practice medicine. So we've created, our first step was to create an incentive for them to expand their practices. We're going to be giving additional payments to help with the administrative burden of adding new patients on. We want to see family practices expand, but if it is the case that family practitioners just have other higher value things that they want to dedicate their time to, we've got to find a way to make sure that patients have the service. So pharmacists are a solution, and nurse practitioners are a solution, and I think everybody should work to their full scope of practice.
Now, as always, anytime we have an episode of Your Province, Your Premier, there's always these little shining moments of, oh, she's just making shit up now. And there's a very clear moment in that clip, ignoring the fact that she was like, you know what? I tried so hard in the whole year to bring doctors into family practice. It's not like the UCP waged a war against physicians for multiple years. Oh, wait, that's exactly what happened. But, you know, you get these people, they go to the med school. They go to school to become doctors, and then they graduate as physicians. And according to Danielle Smith, they then decide to become physician's assistants. Well, that's not a thing, because those are two entirely different academic streams. So it's got to be a little disconcerting. I mean, imagine for the physicians, and quite frankly, for the physician's assistants who are hearing the premier of the province spout that kind of unmitigated bullshit, it's probably a little offensive. But it also highlights the fact that, again, we have Dani spouting off on a subject that she very clearly has no functional working knowledge or mastery of, and yet she's making these sweeping policy decisions and including in these conversations massive decisions in regards to what she's going to do with how much who's getting paid. It's pretty remarkable. But, again, she talks about how we want to have everybody involved in primary care. So we want to have physicians, sure. We want to have nurse practitioners for people who can't get physicians. We want to have pharmacists. But as we hear in another clip, she doesn't stop there.
We can create this new funding model where you're able to give a nurse practitioner or doctor a lump sum for managing patients. Then they can bring in dietitians and nutritionists and physiotherapists and natural practitioners to be able to aid in that front end prevention.
Did you catch it? Natural practitioners. I guess that's the alternative, non-evidence-based, non-scientific evidence that Mr. Manning was recommending that Danielle Smith bring in. Natural practitioners don't practice medicine. Now, there's a lot to be said for placebo effect. I spent years taking a supplement because I believed that it helped keep me not get sick. And I honestly, looking back, would say during that period of time, I got sick less. I'm sure that it was placebo effect. And in fact, when I took a look at the evidence of the efficacy of that particular supplement, I went, oh, this is totally placebo effect. I don't need this. And I stopped taking it. Placebo effect can be very, very real, and people can find comfort in a lot of different things. But when we're talking about medicine, there's a great quote from a comedian that I'm very fond of. Do you know what they call natural medicine that's been proven to work? Medicine. And there's lots of examples of that. Aspirin is a medicine that comes from the bark of the willow tree. And it's a great natural painkiller that's supported by evidence. It also can have a lot of benefits for somebody who's having some sort of heart attack. That's supported, again, by evidence. So you can have natural things that exist in medicine. There's many of them. But when you start to create a whole other category for all the stuff that doesn't have proof, That's not something most experts would agree that taxpayer dollars should be going towards. If you want to pay for your particular brand of woo, then by all means, pay out of your pocket for your particular brand of woo. But public taxpayer dollars shouldn't be supporting things that have no evidence of working or not. We got one last clip that we got to play because, again, it highlights how much the decisions that are being made when it comes to our healthcare system don't have anything to do with evidence. They have more to do with anecdotes and feelings. And does the actual facts really matter?
Smith, it's Dr. Guy Blais, I'm family physician. I spoke to you the first day after you got elected and talked about the shortage of family doctors and stuff like that in the crisis. And I'm obviously disappointed with your solution about saying that a nurse practitioner can replace a family physician, and that somehow you came up with a number that they can do 80% of what we do. So 2 quick questions. One, are you going to put any incentives into, because right now medical students are applying for their internship for family medicine. Are you going to put any incentives for them to stay in Alberta? Secondly, with that, will they, for the family physicians that are just starting, they would have just started in July, are you going to give them the same incentives that you're giving the nurse practitioners? And finally, where does the 80% number come from? Because I've never seen that. Thank you for taking my call.
Well, thank you for your comments on that. Yes, we started with giving incentives to family practitioners by giving them increased amounts of dollars associated with expanding their practice. I've also talked to my colleagues across the country who have said that doctors in Alberta are paid the best relative to other provinces, and we want to maintain that advantage. We want people to continue coming here. I was delighted to see that I think we had almost 300 doctors who graduated choose to stay here, and another 250 in the last quarter choose to come to Alberta. So I think that is positive. In talking with the AMA, I mean, here's the reality. I think we have 5,500 doctors who have registered as family practitioners, and only 2,500 of them are operating a family practice. So I would have to say that we want doctors to practice and operate their own practices. But if they're making a choice for their families and for their own environment that they want to do something else, I can't force people to open up practices. We can only incentivize them. If they choose to work in hospital instead, then that is I want doctors to also be able to have a full range of practice too. But we can't operate Alberta with almost 5 million people with only 2,500 clinics willing to do family practice. We've got to find other ways. So we've started with family practitioners. We're starting to work on the MOU. We would love to see some of the things that would incentivize doctors to stay in that area. But in just watching the way things are going, knowing that nurse practitioners are just chomping at the bit to be able to help fill some of the gap, that's what we've decided to do. I've been talking with both AMA as well as the nurse practitioners. It was many nurse practitioners over many discussions. They'll dispute it. I mean, nurse practitioners, some will say that they get 100% of the same training that doctors have. Others have told me that because there's a few things that are a little bit different, 80%, maybe they have a few fewer years of education in some cases. But we're starting there, and we're going to see if it works. And if we have to make adjustments, we'll make them along the way. But the objective remains the same. We have to have every single person having a family access to a family practitioner.
Some nurse practitioners say that they have exactly all of the same training and education as family doctors. Some say it's only 80%. I'm not really concerned with what the details are. I'm just gonna go with it because I'm sure that the fact that these evidence-based practitioners can't seem to get together over 20% of their training is I'm fine with that. I don't think that's a big issue. Now, again, I want to be clear. I'm not denigrating nurse practitioners when I say this. I'm denigrating Danielle Smith because if that were to be actually true, if Danielle Smith is not aware of the training differences and the education differences between physicians and nurse practitioners, she has no business speaking on these issues with any kind of authority, let alone acting on these issues with any kind of authority. And that's the tee up for the clip.
BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
Those two clips together they just fill my heart up. It's delightful. Anyways, all of that being said, that's the end of our program proper. I want to thank everybody who has stuck around thus far. In particular, somebody who I'm hoping is still going to be our first speaker because I promised her that she would be. I'm going to add her as a speaker now. Hopefully, Jenny Yeremy is still there. And hopefully, she's still awake.
I think so.
How's it going, Jenny?
Good. How are you, Nate?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. Now, this is one of my favorite parts of the show because I get to listen to other people and their thoughts, and I don't have to talk quite as much. But you've got a very specific thing. You reached out in advance to talk about some of the things and the stuffs. In particular, we're talking about logging. So I'm just going to get out of your way. Why did you want to talk about logging tonight?
Thanks, Nate. Yeah, so I've listened to the program, and this is quite a step away from the heart of what you've been discussing in here, but really important and pressing issue. Spray Lake sawmills, yes, they've sold, but I am withholding consent to the new entity that is owning those licenses to clear-cut log in southern Alberta. So there is a program that's set to start as early as December 1st, and it is over 1,100 hectares of clear-cut logging in the head of the Highwood River. The way southern Alberta works is it is a closed basin. So that means we have our only access to water is the headwaters. We don't have much of an aquifer, if you will. You can't really drill many wells and get water sources. So the headwaters is key. It's what gets us drinking water. So what has happened? Originally there was an acceleration of this program. It was slated to be done in 2026, and it got moved up to 2023. And it's also the logging company has been given an increased capacity to clear cut log, so a 30% increase of clear cut logging. There's evidence. There's 3 samples from 3 different logging cuts that show that the practices are not sufficiently restocking trees. So, there's evidence that their processes are not sustainable. And then they constructed a bridge. This bridge is not within the span it is within the riverbed. It's not, there's such thing as a high water line, and they put the bridge within the high water line. And they also put it in during spawning time. So, it should have been, as far as I'm concerned, a revoke of their license from that activity, or at least, a severe fine and, some penalties with that. And so now the last thing that's just quite new, actually, Kevin Van Teegen just put out a post a couple days ago saying that Trout River, so yes, it's named for having trout, no longer has trout in it. So it had clear-cut logging at the head of that river, and the trout has since there's no DNA evidence of cutthroat trout species in that river. So if that isn't enough evidence that this is not a good plan, We also, or I don't know if everybody's aware, but there was a notice put out by our Environment and Protected Areas on November 17th that we are in stage 4 drought in 51 regions in southern Alberta and expected to see further drought conditions in 2024. So we currently have 4 communities that are not, that do not have access to drinking water. They are receiving drinking water via trucking. So my ask of people that have, tuned into this is please reach out to the forestry minister. Please let him know that this is something that, you think is not wise for them to proceed with. We have issued letters to and spoken with the forestry minister's office, the Environment and Protected Areas office, and agriculture and irrigation. And our ask is for a moratorium on logging in southern Alberta due to drought conditions, as well as we want to see the updates to the Forest Act to make sure that we have sustainable forest practices. And the last thing I'll say is the 2 towns, very, very excited about this, High River and Okotoks, which are, aside from Eden Valley, which of course is right in the heart of the Highwood headwater area, they're the closest impacted to this, and they signed letters and issued support of this call for a moratorium on logging. So that's, I think, the summary of what I wanted. Oh, and I just want to mention we've got 12 member organizations that have that support this call as well. So we're doing everything we can to make this clear that this is something that shouldn't proceed, and we're not going to stop if the logging program stops on December 1st. This is too important to let slide. So that's my spiel.
That's pretty good spiel. I mean, I want to throw in here, I got a couple questions I want to follow up with, if that's okay.
Of course, yeah.
But to make sure that I say it at least once, and I will probably say it again, and I'm sure that I think I can commit that we'll follow up with a series of tweets on this over the next week. If anybody is listening to that horror show and you want to do something about it, the email for I wish this was any other name. The Minister of Forestry and Parks is the Honorable Todd Loewen.
Mm-hmm.
His email is F as in Foxtrot, p.minister@gov.ab.ca. His phone number for his office, so this is his official public phone number, I'm not doxing anybody, is 780-644-7353. Once again, that number is 780-644-7353. If you're listening to this and anything that Jenny has just said has made you go, then I would strongly encourage you to write an email, make a phone call, be polite. There's no need for name calling, but this certainly is cause for significant concern. So let the Honorable Todd Loewen know how you feel about this issue. I gotta say, Jenny, unless I'm mistaken, and I'm pretty sure I'm not, you ran for the Alberta Party in 2023, and you just name dropped somebody from the NDP. What is this collaborative thing going on here? I'm confused and startled. What's happening?
Yeah, well, when you can't. Well, I mean, I've always been a person of collaboration. That was the hope of being an Alberta Party elected official, would be to be a bridge builder. That's where I see my strength. So one thing I did miss, Nate, if you don't mind me adding,
Absolutely.
is the reason why the logging is so detrimental is for 2 reasons. Number one, there's limited snowpack, and if that is cleared, you can imagine it's going to evaporate. So this is a rapid potential decline of the Highwood River, which is already, by the way, I learned in a water meeting that there cannot be licenses transferred from it because it is so low to begin with. So to me, these are very big signs that this is a very important decision for Minister Loewen to make, to ensure that this project does not go forward. Oh, and the other part is if there is, a rapid thaw, or there is, let's say, the snowpack does, miraculously, because please hear, it's not expected to be a high snowpack this year. But if it does happen to be, the debris flow that will happen from this rapid thaw could also plug the headwaters. So
it's
there's
just muddy
very
water,
good
though.
reasons. Drinking water, I think, is critical. Like, I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it. But I want to make sure that we have drinking water in Southern Alberta. So.
Well, and I think it's important to highlight. Like, I'm obviously riffing on Brian Jean's comment about muddy water.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
But
Thanks.
I think that it's important to highlight as well that, when we're talking about that muddy water, we're not just obviously drinking water is important. Not everybody has a Brita, but I think one of the other things that's really important to highlight is you talked about one species that's already been wiped clean from one of those areas.
Yeah.
And when you start putting in high amounts of sediment into these bodies of water, whether they're still or running, you're directly impacting the ability of wildlife that's native to that ecosystem, whether it's inside the water quite literally or reliant on that water for drinking and deer baths, I guess. They can't do those things.
100%.
Fish can't breathe in muddy water.
No, for sure. And I don't want to step over the species at risk piece, because it is extremely important. Like we're seeing in this trout river, which is no longer Trout River. It's very important. I guess my concern at this point is, we may as well add ourselves to that list of species at risk if we don't have drinking water. So, this is not an issue to be taken lightly. And I just thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to alert people of this and the urgency of it. So thank you.
No worries. Before you go, our comments section is already starting to spike up over it. People are asking if there's a form letter, if there's any sort of template that has all of the information that you shared, so they don't have to overly listen to the podcast like 16 times to get it all down. Is there any kind of document that people could refer to, and how do they find it?
Yes, so I will in the chat add a copy of the letter that we've drafted. So there's been a couple of groups, well, not just a couple, there's been several groups that have been working this issue. So I'm sort of late to the game here. But so Task has I'll put both these links in the chat. So Task has a petition. Please sign it, and then you can even edit. There's an automatic letter drafted for Minister Lowen. You can add water as being a primary concern. The rest of them, the other issues that I raised are all listed in there. And then that's one way. Another way is we drafted this letter, as I said, I did it as a member of the Calgary Climate Hub. I've been working with a gentleman, Colin Smith. And so that's where we've got all of these member associations signed on and a direct ask for a moratorium on logging in Southern Alberta. So those are the two opportunities. You can reach out to me and certainly add your name, or if you have an organization attached to you to that letter, I'm happy to intake that and carry that forward. Or please use it, send your own version of it. That'd be great.
Can you do me a favor? Don't just throw it up in the chat. If you could put a tweet up. I've decided I'm going to call them tweets this week. To hell with the Zeets business or whatever.
I also withhold consent from calling it X.
There we go. I keep going back and forth because I try to be like, I can change. And then I realize, no, I can't. So I'm going to go with Twitter this week. But if you could throw all of that in a tweet and make sure that you tag us in it, then we will make sure that we push it out through all of our channels as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hey, I got one other question for you. Is the Alberta Party still a thing? Like I saw that Barry Morishita announced that he was stepping down in August, and then I saw that in traditional Alberta Party comms fashion, it was announced like 2 months later. Is the Alberta? Are you still involved? Is it still a thing? Is there anything going on, or is it like what's?
It's still a thing.
Okay.
I'm not currently involved in it though. I am focused on advocacy in certain areas. That's where, but I'm still in contact with them. Well, you never know. But yeah, I am a person that believes in trying to solve problems no matter who's in power. So that's my focus. And and I'm not really a political person, I've discovered. I'm more of a issues person and a collaborative person. I've got some other plans for myself next year, but who knows what the future holds.
Well, I think that, for what it's worth, it sounds like you're doing some incredibly important work, and I really appreciate the fact that you took the time to highlight this stuff with us and our audience tonight. And we will certainly do everything that we can to push all of that stuff out to get it to a wider audience tomorrow morning. And so I think that yay, you didn't win, because you get to do this, and it sounds like this is way more important. So congratulations.
Yeah, I got, it's funny, I got 777 votes, like I got the jackpot. So, and I think it was a sign. That's what I was, and tell myself, is I won the jackpot and not winning. Because yes, you're right, I'm free to roam, free to help whoever I can, free to support. There's lots of amazing groups doing amazing things in this province. And so, yeah, it's been great to explore and meet new people in the space.
Well, I got to say, you gave me the chance to plug Wednesday's episode, so I'm going to do that before I open up the mic to the rest of the audience, because you mentioned the Calgary Climate Hub. And there's a gentleman who's been involved with them named, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Vipond.
Yeah.
Yeah. He and I had a conversation today, and that conversation is going to be going up for our Patreon sponsors tomorrow. It's going to be going up on Wednesday, and we talk about the state of the healthcare system. We talk about the respiratory virus season. We talk about the impact of COVID on and the respiratory viruses on the emergency rooms. So it's plus he's got a trip coming up, and I got to say it's that's a spicy little meatball, that one is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to know what it is, you gotta either sign up to be one of our Patreon supporters, or you gotta wait till Wednesday.
Yeah.
Don't spoiler it.
I won't give it away. No, I won't. It's going to be good, though.
It will. Awesome. Jenny, thank you so much. And in all sincerity, if you ever want to have like a longer form conversation about these issues, because we talked about the bridge a little bit, and we have talked a little bit on the show about the logging stuff, but it's one of those issues that, because of the complexity, like I hadn't heard about the eradication of the trout. These are all major issues that have some nuance to them. And I think in order for people to understand why they're so important, longer form conversations are important. So anytime, open invitation. It's all yours. Just send me a message.
Let's call it a date. I'll set it up with you, because yes, I'd appreciate that. Like I say, we can't, December 1st, it's just, this is one logging site. This is a problem that's prevalent throughout Southern Alberta. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. All right. That was Jenny Yeremy, who is awesome. We'll leave it at that. I had the pleasure of having a conversation with her in the run up to the election, which is why I gave her a bit of a hard time about the Alberta Party stuff. But she was extraordinarily well spoken then, and she's extraordinarily well spoken tonight. And for the chat, who's in the live chat tonight, we've thrown the email and the contact information for the minister there as well, and we will follow up with all of the supporting documentation once the show is done. We're going to open it up to the floor, and we have one of our very regulars, Cassandra, who's tapped in. Cassandra, how are you doing?
I am. I'm doing better.
Good.
I mean, I'm not going to say I haven't had more fights along the way, but the good news is that I found a permanent place.
Awesome.
I found a lovely. It was somebody actually that was already friends on Facebook, and we had a lot of friends in common. But I had put out this video with some frustrations by some things that were said to me by the powers that be. And anyway, somebody had tagged her. Anyway, she happened to be a landlord in Edmonton, and she was a part of some landlord groups that I can't be a part of because I'm not a landlord. And she actually helped me put a nice little ad together, and we put it out there, and I actually got a few different places. Anyway, what ended up happening was one of the places was in the same trailer park. My oldest friend that lives in Calgary, like this is somebody I know from my 20s in Vancouver, and even actually we knew each other before 20s, but we became friends in our 20s, and that actually lives there. So I'm actually moving in with rooming with a retired teacher, and it's right around the corner from this friend of mine, and that'll be December 1st.
That's awesome news. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm very happy, and it was beautiful because I kind of was trying to look for places, but had given up on finding places up around there, and then it was like a miracle. It was like, okay, the moon and the stars aligned, and it was like, okay, so that happened, and I did want to say there was somebody in the audience. I don't know if she's still hung out for this long in the show, but I had been, prior to coming to the hotel and prior to my daughter coming out and helping me finish up my, packing and helping me move some stuff into storage to try to reduce the costs of paying somebody to move me there. A lovely lady had made me an offer for a temporary place. And I had a few other options as well. And I had discussed them with my daughter, and we had actually decided that she was probably my best bet. But what ended up happening is because the day, as I've told you before, the day I dropped my daughter off at the airport, my car broke down. The mechanic came the next day, and after standing out in the freezing cold, I woke up the next morning with like the worst respiratory illness of some kind that I've had in memory, and I was deathly ill, and I was barely recovering it by the time I was getting out, and I really didn't want to give it to anybody. So that was why I had made the choice to, scrounge up the funds that I had to pay for a week in the hotel, was because I thought, well, that will give me the time to recover from this illness before I decide on my next move. And what ended up happening, of course, was what I just told you, is I had received some other help and ended up finding a more permanent place. And also what happened was when I was running out of time in here and I couldn't come up with any more money, Aish finally agreed to pay for cover the rest of the hotel up to December 1st.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So a series of really good things happened. And that's why I ended up not taking this person up on the offer that I originally intended to take them up on. And so if she's listening, I hope she understands. And I apologize that there's another lady that has been another listener that has been wonderful, and they remained anonymous, so that's why I'm not mentioning names. I don't have their permit.
Yep.
But I just feel bad because I haven't been, just because of everything I've been going through, I haven't been as good as keeping in touch with these people as I normally would be, and so I just want them both to know that I appreciate them a lot, and yeah, I just wanted to put that out there before I go on to mention other things I want to talk about. And I wanted to say something, because Jenny came on, I have to say I would love to talk about the effects of clear-cut logging. That's something I know a lot about. My father was a former logger that became an environmental activist, and he used to drive us around and show us, like, look at this. This is what clear-cut logging, and give us an educational lesson about it. And I have all kinds of anecdotes, but because I have other things I want to talk about, I just can't tonight. But I'm so grateful that she did that. So anyway, one of the things I wanted to talk, this drives me nuts, and I thinking about Rick McIver and Danielle Smith and talking about government overreach, and it drives me, and the Constitution, and it really drives me absolutely crazy that the amount of arrogance they have when they say that. Here's the thing about, there is a division of powers under the Constitution, but between federal and provincial governments, that this UCP government it really doesn't understand. They really don't seem to have a clue about it. They say they do, but they really don't. But I want to talk about, because one of the things when we talk about how governments work for us, like they don't seem to get that they're supposed to work for us. So if you run an election and say you run in your campaign, you say, we're not going to touch CPP, and you run on, we're not going to touch your CPP, because you know that if you run on that, you will not get elected. And then you do get elected because you said you wouldn't touch it. And then you turn around and do that anyway. That is government overreach, because you are ignoring the people that voted for you, that did not want you to do it. And that is government. Government overreach is not just about the division of powers. It's about what are you doing for the people that voted for you and the people that you're supposed to represent, which are not just the people that voted for you once you get elected. Then you have to look after everybody. And if you're ignoring them and you're doing the opposite of what they want you to do, that is government overreach. And I think that we don't often talk about and think about it in that way, but it is, because you're there to do what the citizens want you to do. And if you're not doing what the majority of citizens want you to do, and you're doing the opposite and ignoring them and shoving something down their throat that they clearly don't want, that is government overreach.
100%.
And another example of this, and I'll tell you, one of the reasons the Canadian disability benefit became a reality is advocates across Canada were saying, look, for decades, we have been trying to get our provincial governments, which have been administering these provincial social programs for support programs for people with disabilities. We have been trying to get them to step up to the plate and actually offer us adequate support, that would give us the dignity that we have a right to under the Constitution, blah, blah, blah. And they have failed us for decades of activism and advocacy. They have completely ignored us, sold us short, minimized us, and they have failed us. And so we said, hey, federal government, you're our government too, and we voted to you. And because provinces are failing us, we're asking you to intervene and step in and create a benefit for us to do what they're refusing to do. And the reason that's not overreach is because your citizens are saying to you, yeah, we get that these guys have been taking care of this, but they're actually not taking care of it. And they've ignored us. So that's why we're asking you to take care of it.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not government overreach. And that goes for things like housing. And this really, really eggs me on, because I had a conversation with Nixon where they've made public announcements about all this money they're supposedly throwing at housing and affordable housing. And I got screamed at by somebody in Nixon's office that interrupted me, told me my personal experience that was happening to me wasn't real and was a lie, although she didn't use those words. And screamed over me, yelling all these numbers about money they're supposedly throwing at various nonprofits and other agencies that deal with housing. And I've personally called those places up and I said, hey, what about, when I'm trying to advocate for myself to get housing, and I've called them up and say, hey, well, what about this money that the government said they were giving for this and that, like the UCP government, and literally the visceral and automatic response, has been hysterical laughter at times, because not only have they not actually seen any of this money, but the government hasn't even reached out and said, hey, we're going to give you this money and this is how we're going to do it and this is when. Right?
Yeah.
So they're sitting there yelling out on the media and making press and telling you, oh, we're giving all these millions of dollars to to expand the direct rent subsidy and to fix up all these public housing units with Savita and Calgary Housing that are in disrepair from years of government cuts that meant that they weren't able to maintain them properly, and we're going to give money so they can repair those. But none of these places have actually, and other money that's supposed to have gone to other areas in the house, the sector that provides low income and affordable housing. And none of these places have actually even had a conversation with the government, where the government's had a conversation with them about when and how that's going to happen, let alone seen the money. So when they sit there, and one of the things that really ticked me off about it today is that Nixon completely berated Marie Renault in question period today, and he was so arrogant, making all these wild claims about how he was helping people with disabilities. They've done nothing but cut us. I mean, they re-indexed us finally after de-indexing us, but what they touched was actually our support, like our other direct supports. And there's also a thing where I have gone through a series, like just trying to get a little bit of help. I have been demeaned and humiliated by a supervisor with AISH and all these other things, just for trying to, and been told outrageous things, like somehow I needed to plan better and budget better, even though I don't know, like I've done amazing things with what little I have because of planning and budgeting, and so to be told that, so this whole government overreach thing is driving me nuts, and this whole them throwing out numbers of money that they're throwing at things that actually haven't reached those things, and there's no sign of them reaching those things yet. It really drives me nuts. But back to the housing, when they're talking, like I was talking about, that the federal government is somehow overreaching because they're dealing with municipalities. Well, the provincial government cut funding to municipalities, which is part of the reason why they've had to raise like property taxes and things like that, is because the provincial government, the UCP, has cut funding to municipalities and cities. And not only that, when it comes to housing, much like with the CBD, there has been advocates, and not just in Alberta, but across this country, who have said our provinces, especially in conservative provinces, are not doing what they need to do for the housing situation. We're in a housing crisis, and they're not doing what they need to be done. And we need you, our federal government, to step in and fill the gap because our provinces aren't doing it. And that goes especially for Alberta. Alberta has been absolutely horrible under the UCP as far as dealing with housing. They've done nothing. They say they're doing things, but they've actually done absolutely nothing. Okay, they have not given it. So it is not overreach when your citizens of your province, who also are citizens of Canada, are saying our provincial government is failing us. So, hey, federal government, can you fill the gap where they're not acting? Can you fill that gap? Because we're really in a crisis situation here. That's not government overreach. That is the federal government listening to our citizens, where the provincial government has ignored us.
Well, and I think you have to also make the argument as well, and Lord knows that I have some thoughts about our current city council, cough arena cough, but the reality is that city council is also elected to represent the citizens and the constituents of Calgary. And if they've identified, hey, we've got a housing problem, it would be, I think, a bit of an indictment if they didn't do everything in their power, if they didn't pursue every conceivable pathway to try to address the housing crisis that is literally hit
100%, Nate. 100%. I mean, and if they're looking at the housing crisis, and the provincial government is not giving them the assistance and help that they need, why wouldn't they be working with the federal government, who is?
Arena still sucks, though.
Well, I don't even get me started on the arena. I like that is I could go on. Don't even get me started on the arena. So, I mean, but this is the thing that is really drives me up. When, they want to talk about, federal government overreach on these specific items, but they're not doing anything. They only want, the reason they want the federal government to do it with them is because they want to say, we want you to give us all this money and we don't want any strings attached. And then they're not going to spend it on that anyway. We've seen it through COVID. We've seen all that money that was left on the table because they couldn't figure out a way to use it the way they wanted to. And so there was money for frontline workers that those frontline workers never got.
I would also argue that this is another example of the constant strategy of, well, we have to attack the feds on everything, and that's I think the bottom line is that there's no chance that if the federal government does anything, the current provincial government will find a way to say, but you screwed it up, and I will concede that back in the early days of the EMS initiative that Danielle Smith brought in, where she temporarily put an end to hallway waits, I had to say, you know what, even a stop clock twice a day gets it right. Danielle Smith got this one right, and now it's, by many reports, falling apart again. So
right. Well, and the other thing is she likes to talk about, I believe in small government, but she's got the most bloated cabinet in the history of Alberta governments. There has been no larger cabinet. And each one, when you give an MLA a cabinet position, that cabinet position comes they don't just get their regular MLA salary, they get an extra amount of money for having a cabinet position.
Yep.
And so, you know what I mean? So to do that, she doesn't believe in small government. She believes in using cabinet positions to buy people's silence, in my opinion, because a lot of these people are people that would have been vocal against her, perhaps had she not given them a superfluous cabinet position that was unnecessary. And it's costing us more money. And what she's doing with what she wants to do with AHS, by the way, is also top heavy and bigger government, because you're adding more top heavy bureaucracy to a system and paying a whole bunch of extra managers to manage the system with big fat salaries. And that's bigger government. That's not smaller government.
I would be willing to bet the argument that you're going to see Smith make. She hasn't made it yet that I've seen, but I'd be willing to bet the argument that you're going to see Smith make in this siloed approach is, no. See, because what we're doing is we got rid of all of the managers, and now it's these private companies that are running it. So we can't tell them how many managers they can and can't have.
Right. But you're going to pay them to make a profit off of our taxpayer dollars. Yep. When you could directly deliver the same services, and you wouldn't have to pay for all that management, and you wouldn't have to pay for the profit, because it would be non-profit, because it would be run directly by government, and it's cheaper. It's cheaper to do it that way. And you can try to sell it, but if you're paying for somebody to make a profit, that's not cheaper than doing something that doesn't make a profit and just pays people salaries and to do good work.
You're cutting corners. There's no question.
Right. Like it's just utter. Anyway, I have so many words for it. I gotta bite my tongue.
Anything else you wanted to? You're fired up tonight. Is there anything else you wanted to add in?
Oh yeah. You know what? I'll tell you something. Preston Manning, and this drives me, and I have to harp on the Preston Manning thing. you know, and in the grand scheme of people's knowledge, and I don't like to think that I tout myself as an expert on anything of any note. But when I look at what people's actual knowledge of who Preston and the history of Preston Manning and what his ideologies are, I kind of am starting to think maybe I am maybe more of an expert than most people on it. And so I feel like I can't keep silent because, you know, he was the leader of the Reform Party. They gained official opposition status. And one of the main reasons this is one of the main reasons they lost their official opposition status. There's a declassified CSIS document that anybody can access. Anybody here, I could send the link that anybody can access. And now the CSIS document was actually it was called the Heritage Front debacle, or the Heritage Front of Fair, or something like that. I can't remember. So the Heritage Front it was a neo-Nazi organization. One of the leaders of it was a fellow by the name of Wolfgang Droege, a prolific neo-Nazi of the time. And they, one of the things that came out, now the document was a lot about the impropriety of a CSIS operative, I guess, maybe had done some things that were, and a lot of it was about that, but it was also got into some detailed in it, because really they were looking at this neo-Nazi organization, and this operative was hired to infiltrate this organization. But one of the things that came out of it in infiltrating it is this organization had a large membership in the Reform Party under Preston Manning. Now, Preston Manning always likes to say, oh, we don't like those Nazi people. But they knew full well who they were, and they allowed them membership in the party. When it came out that, you know, when the CSIS document came to light at the time, what was most notable to people and a big part of why they lost their official opposition status, it wasn't about, you know, maybe some improper tactics by the CSIS operative that it was supposed to be about. It was the fact that this group of neo-Nazis had such a large membership and within the Reform Party, and people were outright alarmed by it at the time. And a lot of people that were around seem to have even forgotten about this, and nobody likes to talk about it, and it drives me nuts. But you know, the thing is so, and I've mentioned a few times about Preston Manning. He wrote this blue book, which is this kind of manifesto for the Reform Party that he wrote. But one of the key things in there, and I would like to say this, is that so when it all came out, they kicked a whole bunch, including Wolfgang Droege. They revoked all their memberships in the Reform Party. It was like, oh, we don't like those people, and revoke. But one of the quotes in the CSIS document is by Wolfgang Droege, because it was like, oh, well, we see that you're still going to these Reform Party events and stuff. And I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but basically what Wolfgang Droege said was that, well, yeah, they didn't kick all of us out. Like, they just, you know, basically kicked in to make it look good, and a lot of us are still members, but even so, even if we're not, we're still supportive of them. And of course we're supportive of them because their immigration and their economic policies are in line with our own immigration and economic policies. And what's important about this is a neo-Nazi organization that models themselves after the Nazis, right? And their immigration and economic policies. And they said that Preston Manning, the Blue Book, and all of that were in line with that. And another important thing about this Blue Book, about this ideology, and you can see it being implemented, you know, with Preston Manning behind the scenes, is a lot of what the beliefs. He has some very strong beliefs about the charter, about changes that should be made to the charter, which he calls being more equal. But in fact, it's a change in changes in the charter that would actually take away charter rights from equity, equity seeking groups like people with disabilities and LGBTQ and a whole variety of other, and people of etc. It would take away those rights.
You gave me so much reading that I'm gonna have to catch up on.
Yeah, no, like it's very, and the other thing, one of the things about this is this belief. They don't believe in any kind of social support services like disability, like AISH or income supports they don't believe in having anything like that, or a healthcare system, like a public healthcare system, or these kinds of constructs. They actually don't believe in them. So when you see that Preston Manning is been paid, first of all, $2 million for some kind of what did they call it, a commission or whatever they call it, a committee, and 250,000 for a report, by the way, it's come out that was something that he already wrote before he was given this contract. And you think about that. So he's been paid all this money, and you look at what's being done based on what they're trying to push based on this report. And then you look at what his actual belief systems are. Like I said, I'll send you the link to the thesis document and the blue book. You can find on the University of Calgary library website has it. And it's alarming, because if you can look at some of the policies that they're trying to implement, and they're trying to be kind of secretive and go in a roundabout way, but you can see, if you read these things, you can see the connections and start to connect the dots. And so I kind of had to put that out there.
Well, I don't know anything in detail about all the stuff that you just said. So if you can send me the links, I'll definitely follow up.
I will. I think I have sent them to you in the past, but I'll send them to you again.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, thanks for all of my reading material for the next week.
Okay, no problem.
All right.
Good night.
All right. Thanks so much, Cassandra. And all of that being said, boy, I have a lot of reading to do. Because I was not as politically engaged as I am now during the Reform Party years. Most of my Reform Party time was spent debating with my late grandfather around the dinner table about some of the things that I heard some Reform Party people say. So some of this stuff rings a bell, but not in any way that I can substantively speak to. So I'm gonna wait for those links and follow up with that. I don't think we have any other speakers. We're coming up to the 3-hour mark, so I think that we're going to be cutting the two parts into the two-parter again. My fault for having to do 2 weeks of content in 1 week. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who stuck around listening tonight. Especially want to say a big thank you to the comment section on the YouTubes. You guys are so awesome. I've been watching for the last half. Some of the comments scroll by, and we've got like baby announcements going on. We've got all kinds of super awesome stuff. So that's fantastic. I think that's just so great. You guys are so fantastic. Big thank you to everybody who's listening live on the Twitter Spaces tonight. That's super fantastic. Big thank you to, I want to say big thank you to Cassandra. Big thank you to Jenny. We're going to be doing a follow-up episode with Jenny, sounds like, which is going to be fantastic, because that's a really big issue that people need to be paying much more attention to, quite frankly. Because why do we keep screwing with our water? I just don't get it. We should stop doing that, is Nate's policy advice. Now's the time for the many plugs, though. So this is where we're gonna do the plugs. As I realize that we deleted those graphics. So we'll do verbal plugs. We've got the store up now at the abpoly.ca, website. We've partnered with them to do some merch. Christmas is coming. You know what your local MLA desperately needs? They need themselves a breakdown t-shirt or a breakdown mug. I'm sure they would appreciate it immensely. So you can find all of our merch at abpoly.ca. I talked a little bit about the episode that we're dropping this week. We have a conversation with Dr. Joe Vipond, who's an emergency room physician and advocate of a great many things. He sat down with us to have a conversation about the state of the healthcare system, the state of emergency rooms, and in response to one of the things that people have been saying, hey, you talk a lot about the problems, but you don't necessarily offer so much of the solutions. Well, Jenny brought some solutions to the table tonight. And also Dr. Vipond brings a boatload of solutions and things that people can do to protect themselves during this respiratory virus / influenza / RSV / COVID season that we're heading into with the silly season coming up. That episode will go live for our Patreon sponsors tomorrow, and it will be broadcast live on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Now I transition to the plug for the Patreon. If you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we'd love nothing more than if you signed up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/TheBreakdownAB, where for the price of a fancy cup of coffee, you can help us continue to produce the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, and also get a warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that you're helping to finance some of our FOIPing. We got a couple of FOIP irons in the fire. I think we might be adding one tonight because there's this media publication that appears to be, they don't seem to be getting federal subsidies in so much as they're getting provincial government advertising dollars. And I'm super curious how much they get. So we're going to see if we can figure that out. But it's because of the support of our Patreon supporters that we're able to file those FOIPs. So if you can afford it, if you've got the means, then www.patreon.com/TheBreakdownAB. All of that being said, I want to say, again, a big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. Everybody's listening to the show. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, if you've made it this far, first of all, props. Second of all, leave a little bit of a review. Every once in a while, the trolls figure out that you can leave reviews for podcasts, and they say some very mean things. It doesn't hurt anybody's feelings because we've been doing this for coming up to 5 years now, and so we're about as thick-skinned as you can get. But the positive reviews help the podcast get into even more ears. So swing by your local podcast and platform, leave us a little bit of a review. That would be delightful. 5 stars, I hear, is a good rating. And that's pretty much it for tonight. One other thing that I just wanted to say before we drop off your radar for 3 or 4 days. We'll be back next Sunday. But one other thing that I wanted to just quickly say is we've been getting quite a few DMs and quite a few comments from people who are experiencing what I can only describe as a completely non-clinical term as some burnout. The bad. We have a healthcare system that's being obliterated. We have a premier who doesn't seem to know that it's an entirely different academic stream for a physician's assistant as opposed to an actual physician, as well as a great many other things that we tried to detail tonight. There's a lot going on, and it can be profoundly overwhelming. That's okay. That's normal. The piece of advice, because, and this is where the pontificating kicks in, I guess. The piece of advice people ask, and how do you deal with it? And you just got to take it in breathers, and you got to recognize when, okay, this has gotten to be just a little bit too much. I need to go outside and touch grass, as the kids say, I'm told. But the reality is right now, reality is in many ways incompatible with mental health. And so you have to do your horrifying political reality in doses. That's okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Because the the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of horrible things going on, not even just in Alberta. We focus on Alberta politics pretty much exclusively here because that's our sandbox, but anybody who's been paying attention to any of the headlines knows things have been stark for a little while, and that can be overwhelming. But the other truth is we need y'all in this fight. And if you let them exhaust you, if you let them burn you out, that's how they win. So the people who are messing with our healthcare, the people who are messing with our way of life, the people who are trying to keep us constantly angry, constantly in crisis, that's their strategy. And they're playing a long game. And if we want to do everything that we can to keep Alberta the amazing place that it is, we got to be willing to play a long game too. And so sometimes that means if you need to take a breather, give yourself permission to take a breather. That's okay. It's totally okay because we need every single voice in order to make sure that we, A, push back and bend the moral arc in the right direction, but also to make sure that, if we get some more sane, less corporate crony people elected ever, A, to get those people elected, but B, to make sure that we can hold them to account too, because that's what it's all about. We're a democracy, but we're a democracy once every 4 years. And the other 3 years and 364 days, there's probably a leap year in there that screwed up my math. But the rest of that time, we got to make sure that we're not coasting and we're not falling into apathy. And one of the quickest ways to get into apathy is to get burnt out. So take your breaks, find something nice. I play Minecraft now. It's delightful. I'm not saying you should, but it's fun. There's lots of things you could do. But most important thing is to take care of yourselves, because it is by doing that, you're able to stay engaged in the conversation. And in order to have the conversations that we need to have, you need to be able to take care of yourselves. So take care of yourselves. We'll see you live next Sunday. And in the meantime and in between time, keep the conversation going.